I sat in silence at my father's wedding reception as his new wife threw a $22,000 catering bill onto my plate, demanding I pay for my seat. She thought she was humiliating a broke botanist who lived in a rundown greenhouse. She had no idea she was trying to extort a woman with a $50 million secret and that her greed was about to cost her everything. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing arrogant people get exactly what they deserve. My name is Gwendolyn. I am 33 years old, and until that evening, I was the designated embarrassment of the Pierce family. My father Donovan had always valued status over substance. When my grandfather Winston passed away, leaving his sprawling botanical research estate behind, my father viewed the land as nothing more than a pile of dirt waiting to be monetized. I, on the other hand, am a landscape architect and botanist. I spend my days with soil under my fingernails, cultivating rare and endangered plant species. To my father and his high society circle, my career was a complete joke. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the soft jazz playing in the background of the elite country club felt suffocating. It was my father's wedding day. At 58, he was marrying Sylvia, a 52-year-old woman whose primary talent was spending money she did not earn. We were seated at the head table surrounded by the city's wealthiest elite. I was quietly eating my salad, wearing a simple but elegant tailored suit that stood out against a sea of heavy sequins and expensive feathers. Suddenly, the atmosphere at the table shifted. Sylvia stood up, her heavily jeweled hand clutching a thick leather folio from the venue management. With a theatrical sigh designed to draw the attention of the surrounding tables, she tossed the folio directly onto my dinner plate. The heavy leather landed with a thud, splashing vinaigrette onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Your father has maxed out every credit card he owns to pay for this beautiful wedding," Sylvia announced, her voice carrying across the dining room. "Since you did not bother to buy us a wedding gift, and you are currently living rent-free in your grandfather's crumbling old greenhouse, the least you can do is pay for the floral arrangements and the catering. Use the money you get from selling your little weeds." I looked down at the invoice. The total was $22,000. Across the table, Sylvia's 28-year-old daughter Kelsey let out a sharp laugh. She immediately lifted her phone, angling the camera to capture my reaction for her thousands of social media followers. Kelsey was the golden child of this new blended family, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer who contributed absolutely nothing to society but expected the world to hand her everything. Sitting next to Kelsey was her husband, Trey. He was a 32-year-old African-American real estate developer who had built his fortune by paving over natural landscapes to construct overpriced luxury condos. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon with a mocking, arrogant grin. "Come on, Gwendolyn," Trey sneered, his voice loud enough for his wealthy business partners at the next table to hear. "If you are struggling to scrape together the cash from your dirt-digging business, my real estate firm can offer you a payday loan. The interest rates are brutal, but family helps family, right?" My father stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. He was too cowardly to stand up to Sylvia and far too obsessed with maintaining his image in front of Trey's affluent associates to defend his own daughter. They all expected me to break down to cause a scene or to run away in tears of humiliation. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or beg for mercy. I picked up the leather folio and calmly wiped a drop of dressing off the cover. $22,000, I said, my voice perfectly level and composed. "Are you sure you do not want to add a gratuity for the waitstaff, Sylvia? Or did you plan to stiff them too?" Sylvia crossed her arms, her face flushing with anger at my lack of submission. "Just pay the bill, Gwendolyn. Stop trying to act like you are above us when you play in the mud for a living." I reached into my blazer pocket. I did not pull out the standard debit card my father assumed I carried. Instead, I pulled out a heavy, solid black Centurion card. The matte metal gleamed under the chandeliers. I handed it to the waiter who was hovering nervously nearby. "Put the entire reception on this," I told the waiter smoothly. "And add a generous tip for your team. You have had to put up with a lot tonight." The waiter's eyes widened as he took the heavy metal card, nodding quickly before hurrying away toward the billing counter. Back at the table, the silence was absolute and deafening. Trey dropped his smirk, his posture suddenly rigid. Kelsey slowly lowered her phone, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. My father finally looked up, his jaw slightly open as his brain tried to process what had just happened. Sylvia, recovering from her initial shock, let out a harsh and dismissive scoff. She looked at the guests around us and forced a loud laugh. "Well, I suppose we should thank you," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You just maxed out your life savings and probably took out a predatory loan just to show off for 5 minutes. Have fun paying that off for the rest of your life. Enjoy your empty bank account." I just smiled, taking a calm sip of my sparkling water. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so utterly convinced of my poverty, that they could not fathom the reality of the situation. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He carried the leather folio on a silver tray, placing it respectfully in front of me. "Your card, ma'am," he said politely. "And the front desk asked me to hand this to you. It was delivered via secure courier this afternoon to the venue per your instructions." He placed a thick wax-sealed envelope next to my water glass. The logo of a highly exclusive private wealth management firm was embossed on the front. I picked up my black card and slid it back into my pocket. Then, with deliberate slowness, I broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was my monthly statement for the blind trust my late grandfather had established. Grandfather Winston knew exactly what my father was. He knew Donovan was a reckless spender who would eventually destroy the family legacy to impress a woman like Sylvia. So my grandfather bypassed him entirely, leaving his fortune and the massive land holdings exclusively to me. I pulled out the crisp, watermarked paper and let my eyes fall to the bottom line. The bold black ink displayed the current liquid balance of the trust: $52,450,000. I folded the statement, slipped it securely into my blazer, and looked across the table at Sylvia's gloating face, then at Trey's calculating stare, and finally at my father's spineless posture. "Thank you for the lovely dinner," I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. "I will leave you all to celebrate. Enjoy it while it lasts." As I walked out of the opulent ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, I felt a surge of absolute power. Sylvia and Trey thought they were dealing with a defenseless gardener. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who held the financial power to buy and sell their entire existence. The trap was set, and they were walking right into it, too. It was exactly 3 days after the disastrous wedding reception. I was back in my absolute safest sanctuary, the sprawling 50-acre botanical research facility my late grandfather had built with his own 2 hands. The air inside the main glass conservatory was thick with tropical humidity and the rich, comforting scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I stood at my heavy wooden potting table, carefully repotting a highly endangered species of ghost orchid. My hands were covered in dark soil, my hair tied back in a messy bun. I was exactly where I belonged. To the outside world, this massive glass and steel structure looked like a relic of a bygone era. To my status-obsessed family, it was nothing more than an ugly eyesore taking up prime commercial real estate. But to me, it was a vital conservation hub housing plant species that existed nowhere else on the entire continent. I was gently packing nutrient-rich moss around the delicate roots of the orchid when the heavy metal doors of the conservatory were violently shoved open. The sudden aggressive crash echoed loudly against the vaulted glass panels above. I did not drop the rare orchid. I carefully set the terracotta pot aside and wiped my hands on my denim overalls before turning around. Marching down the central gravel pathway was a procession of pure, unfiltered greed. Sylvia led the charge, struggling awkwardly to walk on the uneven gravel in her sharp designer stilettos. Right beside her was Trey, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that looked entirely ridiculous inside a humid greenhouse. Behind them trailed my father Donovan, looking deeply uncomfortable, but trying desperately to project an air of false authority. Bringing up the rear was a man I did not recognize immediately, a slick-looking corporate lawyer clutching a thick leather briefcase. He had the unmistakable aura of someone who made a living bullying people into total submission. They stopped right in front of my workstation, their heavy, expensive cologne clashing violently with the natural, earthy scent of my workspace. Sylvia crossed her arms tightly, looking around the lush green space with a sneer of absolute disgust. She swatted away a hanging fern vine as if it were a contagious disease. "Your time playing in the dirt is officially over, Gwendolyn," she announced, her voice piercing the quiet hum of the climate control fans. "You have embarrassed this family for the very last time." The lawyer stepped forward, not bothering to offer a polite introduction. He unclasped his heavy briefcase and pulled out a stack of dense legal documents, slamming them aggressively right onto my potting table. A small cloud of loose potting soil puffed into the air, settling over the crisp white paper. "I am Gordon, legal counsel for your father and his new wife," the lawyer stated coldly. "What you are looking at is a formal eviction notice, accompanied by an immediate deed transfer agreement. You have exactly 48 hours to pack up your personal belongings and vacate these premises permanently." I looked down at the imposing stack of paperwork, then back up at Trey, who was already surveying the massive property like he had conquered it. Trey stepped up, brushing a speck of imaginary dust off his expensive lapel. "This entire 50-acre plot is completely wasted on a few pathetic flowers and weeds," he said with a greedy, self-satisfied grin. "My real estate development firm is officially seizing this land to build the Kelsey Trey Eco Resort. We are going to flatten these outdated glass houses, pave over this entire valley, and put up a luxury wellness retreat for ultra-high net worth clients. It is going to be the undisputed crown jewel of my development portfolio. And since my beautiful mother-in-law here is now officially managing your father's estate, we are taking full control of this prime real estate today." I finally shifted my gaze to my father, who was standing slightly behind Trey. "You are seriously letting them pave over your own father's entire life work?" I asked him, keeping my voice completely steady and devoid of the panic they desperately wanted to see. Donovan shifted his weight nervously from side to side, absolutely refusing to make direct eye contact with me. "It is just business, Gwendolyn," he muttered, sounding exactly like a weak man reciting a script he had been violently forced to memorize. "This property is a massive financial drain on the family. Sylvia and Trey have a brilliant visionary plan that will generate millions in revenue for our future. If you do not sign that deed transfer over to Sylvia right this second, I will personally call the local police. I will have you forcibly removed for criminal trespassing, and I will hire a demolition crew to rip out every single one of these useless weeds by sunset. Do not make this difficult. Just sign the paper and walk away before you make things worse for yourself." I slowly picked up the heavy legal document, feeling the immense weight of their collective arrogance pressing down on me. I read the bold print at the very top of the page. They were demanding the total unencumbered transfer of Pierce Land LLC. My heart gave a powerful rhythmic beat against my ribs. They were entirely clueless. They had absolutely no idea how my brilliant grandfather had legally structured this specific corporate entity. They saw a piece of paper that promised them valuable land, completely blind to the financial guillotine hanging right above it. I looked at their demanding, greedy faces. I let my shoulders slump forward, manufacturing a perfectly believable look of total crushing defeat. I let out a long, shaky breath, picked up the expensive silver pen Gordon offered, and clicked it open. "Fine," I said, letting my voice crack just a fraction to sell the performance. "Take it. Take all of it." I scrawled my signature across the bottom line. Gordon snatched the paper back instantly, a highly triumphant, predatory smile breaking across his face. Trey let out a loud whoop of absolute victory, high-fiving his lawyer with explosive energy. Sylvia practically beamed with vicious satisfaction, grabbing my father's arm, as they all turned around and marched out of the greenhouse, cheering loudly about their new multi-million-dollar luxury resort. I stood completely still, listening to the sound of their expensive shoes crunching away on the gravel path. Once the heavy metal doors clicked shut, plunging the greenhouse back into peaceful silence, I calmly wiped the remaining dirt from my hands. I reached into the deep pocket of my overalls, pulled out my phone and dialed the direct encrypted line to my private wealth manager. They took the bait, I said, staring at the empty space on the table where the document had just been. Initiate phase 2. When my father married a woman absolutely obsessed with wealth and social status, I kept the $50 million my late grandfather left me a complete secret. It turned out to be the absolute smartest decision I ever made in my entire life. Just days after their ridiculously lavish wedding, my father's new wife would show up at my door uninvited with a vicious corporate lawyer at her side, ready to steal what she thought was just a worthless plot of dirt. She had no earthly idea she was walking straight into an ironclad financial trap. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your true worth. My name is Gwendolyn. I am 33 years old, and until that evening, I was the designated embarrassment of the Pierce family. My father Donovan had always valued status over substance. When my grandfather Winston passed away, leaving his sprawling botanical research estate behind, my father viewed the land as nothing more than a pile of dirt waiting to be monetized. I, on the other hand, am a landscape architect and botanist. I spend my days with soil under my fingernails, cultivating rare and endangered plant species. To my father and his high society circle, my career was a complete joke. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the soft jazz playing in the background of the elite country club felt entirely suffocating. It was my father's wedding day. At 58 years old, Donovan was marrying Sylvia, a 52-year-old woman whose primary talent was spending money she did not earn. We were seated at the head table, surrounded by the city's wealthiest and most superficial elite. I was quietly eating my salad, wearing a simple but elegant tailored suit that stood out starkly against a sea of heavy sequins, restrictive corsets, and expensive feathers. My father had spared absolutely no expense for this single evening. He wanted to impress Sylvia's family and prove he was a titan of industry. The reality was that he was a spineless man who had squandered his own inherited wealth on reckless investments. Suddenly, the atmosphere at the table shifted violently. Sylvia stood up, her heavily jeweled hand clutching a thick leather folio from the venue management. With a theatrical sigh deliberately designed to draw the attention of the surrounding tables, she tossed the folio directly onto my dinner plate. The heavy leather landed with a loud thud, splashing vinaigrette onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Your father has maxed out every credit card he owns to pay for this beautiful wedding," Sylvia announced, her voice carrying sharply across the dining room so that everyone could hear. "Since you did not even bother to buy us a wedding gift and you are currently living rent-free in your grandfather's crumbling old greenhouse, the least you can do is pay for the floral arrangements and the catering. Use the money you get from selling your little weeds to be useful for once." I looked down at the invoice resting on my plate. The total printed at the bottom was $22,000. Across the table, Sylvia's 28-year-old daughter Kelsey let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She immediately lifted her phone, angling the camera to capture my reaction for her thousands of social media followers. Kelsey was the golden child of this new blended family, an arrogant lifestyle influencer who contributed absolutely nothing to society but expected the world to hand her everything on a silver platter. Sitting right next to Kelsey was her husband Trey. He was a 32-year-old African-American real estate developer who had built his fortune by paving over natural landscapes to construct overpriced, soulless luxury condos. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his custom silk tie, and swirled his expensive bourbon with a highly arrogant grin. "Come on, Gwendolyn." Trey sneered, his deep voice intentionally loud enough for his wealthy business partners at the very next table to hear. "If you are struggling to scrape together the cash from your little dirt-digging business, my real estate firm can offer you a payday loan. The interest rates are completely brutal, but family helps family, right?" My father just stared down at his plate, absolutely refusing to meet my eyes. He was far too cowardly to stand up to Sylvia and entirely too obsessed with maintaining his image in front of Trey's affluent associates to defend his own flesh and blood. They all sat there expecting me to break down to cause a massive scene or to run away in tears of humiliation. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or beg for any mercy. I simply picked up the leather folio and calmly wiped a drop of salad dressing off the cover. $22,000, I said, my voice perfectly level and composed. Are you absolutely sure you do not want to add a larger gratuity for the waitstaff, Sylvia? Or did you plan to stiff them on their hard work too? Sylvia crossed her arms tightly, her face flushing with intense anger at my complete lack of submission. Just pay the bill, Gwendolyn. Stop trying to act like you're above us when you play in the mud for a living. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I did not pull out the standard debit card my father assumed I carried. Instead, I pulled out a heavy, unmarked, solid black Centurion card. The matte metal gleamed under the opulent chandeliers above us. I handed it directly to the waiter who was hovering nervously nearby. Put the entire reception tab on this, I told the waiter smoothly. And add a very generous tip for your team. You have had to put up with a lot of nonsense tonight. The waiter's eyes went wide as he took the heavy metal card, nodding quickly before hurrying away toward the billing counter. Back at the head table, the silence was absolute and incredibly deafening. Trey completely dropped his smirk, his posture suddenly rigid as he stared at the spot where the black card had been. Kelsey slowly lowered her phone, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. My father finally looked up, his jaw hanging slightly open as his brain tried to process what had just happened. Sylvia, recovering from her initial shock, let out a harsh and highly dismissive scoff. She looked at the guests around us and forced a loud theatrical laugh to save face. "Well, I suppose we should thank you," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You just maxed out your entire life savings and probably took out a predatory loan just to show off for 5 minutes. Have fun paying that off for the rest of your pathetic life. Enjoy your completely empty bank account." I just smiled, taking a calm sip of my sparkling water. They were so blinded by their own extreme arrogance, so utterly convinced of my poverty, that they could not fathom the reality of the situation. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He carried the leather folio on a silver tray, placing it highly respectfully in front of me. "Your card, ma'am," he said politely. "And the front desk asked me to hand this to you. It was delivered via secure courier this afternoon to the venue exactly per your instructions." He placed a thick wax-sealed envelope right next to my water glass. The distinct logo of a highly exclusive private wealth management firm was embossed on the front. I picked up my black card and slid it safely back into my pocket. Then, with deliberate and agonizing slowness, I broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was my monthly statement for the blind trust my late grandfather had established. Grandfather Winston knew exactly what my father was. He knew Donovan was a reckless spender who would eventually destroy the Pierce family legacy to impress a greedy woman like Sylvia. So my grandfather bypassed him entirely, leaving his fortune and the massive land holdings exclusively to me. I pulled out the crisp watermarked paper and let my eyes fall to the bottom line. The bold black ink displayed the current liquid balance of the trust: $52,450,000. I folded the statement, slipped it securely into my blazer, and looked across the table at Sylvia's gloating face. Then at Trey's calculating stare, and finally at my father's spineless posture. "Thank you for the lovely dinner," I said, pushing my chair back and standing up tall. "I will leave you all to celebrate. Enjoy it while it lasts." As I walked out of this opulent ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor, I felt a massive surge of absolute power. Sylvia and Trey thought they were dealing with a defenseless gardener. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who held the financial power to buy and sell their entire existence. The trap was officially set, and they were eagerly walking right into it. I sat in my truck, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. I put my vehicle in drive, gently pressing the accelerator, and rolled away down the mountain road, leaving them to drown in the very dirt they had tried to steal from me. The deafening roar of heavy diesel engines shattered the quiet tranquility of the early morning. I stood just inside the main entrance of the conservatory, carefully placing the last of my ghost orchids into a temperature-controlled transport crate. The ground beneath my boots vibrated as a fleet of massive yellow bulldozers and excavators rolled down the private gravel driveway. Trey was not wasting a single second. He had forced my signature on the deed transfer barely 24 hours ago, and he was already here to claim his prize and break ground on his ridiculous luxury resort. I secured the latch on the final crate and pushed my heavy utility cart out into the crisp morning air. The scene unfolding in front of my grandfather's historic property was a masterclass in profound arrogance. Trey was standing on the hood of his custom black SUV wearing an immaculately tailored suit, paired with a pristine white hard hat that had clearly never seen a day of actual labor. He was shouting orders at a team of construction foremen who looked thoroughly annoyed by his theatrical behavior. Right beside him, wearing designer activewear and oversized sunglasses, was Kelsey. She was holding her smartphone at the end of an expensive gimbal, actively live streaming to her thousands of followers. She spun around in circles, making sure to capture the massive bulldozers and the towering glass structure of my greenhouse in the background. "Welcome to the future site of the Kelsey Trey Eco Resort, you guys," she squealed into her camera, her voice overly loud and grating. "My incredible husband just acquired this massive 50-acre plot right in the heart of the valley. We are going to tear down this hideous, outdated weed farm and build the most exclusive wellness retreat in the state. Stay tuned for the demolition. It is going to be absolutely iconic." I rolled my cart down the pathway, my sturdy boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Kelsey spotted me and immediately shoved her camera directly into my face, her lips curled into a vicious smirk. "Say goodbye to your little mud hut," Gwendolyn, Kelsey taunted, making sure her followers had a clear view of my dirt-stained overalls. "It is time for you to pack up your weeds and vacate the premises. Real business owners are taking over now." Trey hopped down from the hood of his vehicle and strutted over to join his wife. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at my transport crates with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "I told you I was going to flatten this place," Trey boasted, his deep voice carrying over the rumble of the idling excavators. "You should be grateful I gave you the morning to gather your pathetic little houseplants. Now take your dirt and leave before I have my crew bulldoze your truck along with the glass house." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of protest. I looked at Kelsey's phone camera, offered a polite, completely serene smile, and then looked directly into Trey's gloating eyes. "I am leaving right now," I said, my tone perfectly even. "The property is all yours, Trey. I highly recommend you start digging immediately. You would not want to delay your grand vision." Trey let out a booming laugh, slapping the side of my utility cart. "See, Kelsey, I told you she would finally learn her place. Get out of here, Gwendolyn." I loaded my crates into the back of my heavy-duty transport truck, secured the tailgate, and climbed into the driver's seat. I started the engine and slowly pulled out of the main gate. I did not drive far. I pulled onto the elevated shoulder of the public access road just outside the property line, parking my truck, where I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire valley. I rolled down my window, letting the cool morning breeze fill the cabin, and pressed the hands-free calling button on my dashboard console. My private wealth manager and lead legal counsel answered on the very first ring. "Good morning, Gwendolyn," he said smoothly. "I see the GPS tracker on your truck shows you are off the main property. Has the transfer been fully executed?" The ink is dry and Trey is currently standing in front of 3 massive excavators, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the construction crew below. "Confirm the legal structure for me one more time. I want to enjoy this." My lawyer chuckled, the sound crisp through the truck speakers. "Your grandfather Winston was an absolute visionary. When he purchased that specific 50-acre plot decades ago, it was heavily contaminated by an old industrial chemical spill from the 1970s. He spent a fortune cleaning the soil to make it safe for botanical research, but the federal liability never vanished." He paused, clearly relishing the legal brilliance of the setup. "Your grandfather created Pierceland LLC as a highly specific containment shell. Under federal law, as long as the land remained zoned strictly for agricultural and botanical conservation, the property was completely tax-exempt and legally protected. But the LLC carries a dormant mandatory environmental cleanup penalty. The exact second that land is rezoned for commercial real estate, or the moment commercial construction breaks ground, a hidden $15 million federal tax liability is instantly triggered. And since Trey forced you to sign over the LLC entirely to his name, he just assumed total legal and financial responsibility for the federal debt. I watched from my truck as Trey proudly threw his arm around Kelsey, posing for another photo. He turned to his lead foreman and gave a loud, enthusiastic signal. "Tear it up," Trey shouted. The massive yellow bulldozer roared to life. Its heavy steel treads dug deep into the earth. The hydraulic arm lowered, and the massive metal bucket smashed violently into the pristine soil of the valley. The operator pulled the lever, tearing a massive gaping trench into the ground and turning over the very first pile of earth for commercial development. The trap was sprung. Before the bulldozer could even lift its bucket for a second scoop, the distinct piercing wail of heavy sirens echoed down the valley road. I leaned forward against my steering wheel, resting my chin on my hands, completely mesmerized by the show. A fleet of 6 black, heavily armored government SUVs, with federal license plates, came speeding down the private gravel driveway. They moved with aggressive, terrifying precision, surrounding the construction equipment and kicking up a massive cloud of dust. The sirens blared loudly, completely drowning out the sound of the diesel engines. Trey froze, his arrogant smile vanishing instantly. Kelsey dropped her phone, screaming in shock as tactical doors swung open. Over a dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters EPA printed across their backs swarmed the construction site. "Shut off the machines right now," the lead federal agent bellowed through a megaphone. "Step away from the equipment. This is a federally protected environmental zone." Trey rushed forward, his face flushed with panicked anger. "What is the meaning of this? I own this land. I am a commercial developer, and you are trespassing on private property." The lead agent holstered his megaphone and pulled a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents from his jacket. He marched directly up to Trey and shoved the paperwork hard into his chest. "You are the registered owner of Pierce Land LLC," the agent stated loudly. "You just initiated unauthorized commercial excavation on a restricted environmental liability zone. By breaking this soil, you have officially triggered the dormant federal cleanup clause. You are hereby served with an immediate cease and desist order and a mandatory federal tax liability citation in the amount of $15 million. This fine is payable immediately, and your personal assets are subject to federal seizure until the debt is cleared." The color completely drained from Trey's face. He looked down at the massive $15 million federal citation in his trembling hands, his mouth opening and closing in absolute speechless horror. Kelsey let out a piercing shriek, clutching her head as the federal agents began placing bright yellow lockdown tape across the bulldozers. I sat in my truck, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. I put my vehicle in drive, gently pressing the accelerator, and rolled away down the mountain road, leaving them to drown in the very dirt they had tried to steal from me. The morning after the Environmental Protection Agency shut down Trey's highly publicized resort project, the fallout was absolutely spectacular. My private wealth manager informed me that Trey was currently facing a mountain of federal litigation. But men like my arrogant brother-in-law do not simply accept defeat and reflect on their own massive mistakes. They lash out. Trey could not legally touch the federal government, so he aimed all his vicious, humiliated rage directly at me. He was determined to completely destroy my livelihood, foolishly believing I was still just a helpless, struggling botanist with a few bags of potting soil to my name. I had recently relocated my base of operations to a secondary, smaller climate-controlled facility that I had quietly leased months ago. To scale up my independent conservation efforts and fulfill a series of high-profile botanical contracts, I desperately needed to acquire a massive bulk shipment of specialized materials. I required precise nutrient blends, industrial-grade irrigation lines, and several crates of highly specific drought-resistant seeds that were native to the region. There was only one commercial distributor in the entire state capable of fulfilling an order of that massive magnitude. Horizon Agricultural Distributors was a sprawling industrial supply chain warehouse that provided materials to every major landscaping and real estate firm on the coast. I drove my heavy-duty transport truck into the massive loading bay of the Horizon facility early on a Tuesday morning. The air inside the warehouse smelled sharply of nitrogen and raw lumber. I walked straight up the metal stairs to the glass-enclosed management office, holding a detailed purchase order that totaled nearly $60,000. It was a massive commission for them, the kind of order that usually resulted in firm handshakes and complimentary coffee. I pushed open the door and walked up to the heavy oak desk. Sitting behind it was Greg, the regional supply manager. He was a balding man in his late 40s who had always been perfectly polite to me in the past when I accompanied my grandfather on supply runs. But today, the exact moment Greg looked up and saw my face, all the color instantly drained from his cheeks. He looked like he had just seen a ghost walk into his office. "Good morning, Greg," I said cheerfully, placing the thick purchase order down on his desk. "I need to arrange an expedited delivery for these materials by Thursday morning. It is a large bulk order, so I will need your team to prepare the freight trucks." Greg did not reach for the paper. He stared at it, a heavy bead of sweat forming on his forehead. He swallowed hard, nervously adjusting his collar. "Gwendolyn," he stammered, his voice tight with deep anxiety. "I cannot process this order. I cannot sell you anything. Not a single bag of soil. Not a single seed." I frowned, keeping my posture entirely relaxed. "Is there a supply chain issue? I can pay the expedited freight costs up front if transportation is the problem." "It is not the freight," Greg said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper as he glanced nervously out the glass windows of his office as if expecting someone to be watching him. "It is your brother-in-law." Trey called my corporate office yesterday afternoon. He was absolutely furious. He told our regional director that if Horizon Agricultural sells so much as a single grain of dirt to you, his real estate development firm will immediately cancel every single landscaping and construction contract he has with us. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer magnitude of Trey's petty vindictiveness wash over me. Trey was threatening to pull millions of dollars in corporate accounts just to starve my independent business. Greg looked down at my purchase order with a mixture of guilt and self-preservation. "Trey is one of our top 5 corporate buyers, Gwendolyn. His luxury condo developments keep our lights on. He made it perfectly clear to every commercial plant vendor, nursery, and agricultural supplier in a 200-mile radius. You are officially blacklisted. Nobody is going to sell to you. If I process this order, I will lose my job by noon." To prove his point, and perhaps to ensure he had a story to tell Trey's associates to protect his own skin, Greg picked up my meticulously prepared purchase order. With shaking hands, he ripped the heavy paper right down the middle, and then tore it again, dropping the shredded pieces of my order back onto his desk. "I am sorry," Greg said, not sounding sorry at all. "But you need to leave my office. You are bad for business." Just as the torn pieces of paper settled on the desk, my phone buzzed sharply in the pocket of my overalls. I calmly pulled it out and looked at the bright screen. It was a text message from Kelsey. She had attached a highly filtered, mocking photograph of a dead, completely withered flower sitting in a cracked plastic pot. Underneath the photo was a text that read, "Trey says nobody is going to sell you anything ever again. Stay in your lane, dirt digger. Have fun going bankrupt." I looked at the text message, the dead flower, and the shredded purchase order on Greg's desk. They honestly believed they had completely cornered me. They thought cutting off my physical supplies would force me to crawl back to my father and beg for financial mercy. They were playing a ruthless game of checkers, completely unaware that I owned the entire board. I did not yell at Greg. I did not demand to speak to his superiors. I simply offered him a cool, entirely unbothered smile. "I understand completely, Greg," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "You are just trying to protect your livelihood. Have a wonderful morning." I turned around and walked out of the glass office, descending the metal stairs with a steady, confident rhythm. I walked straight out of the noisy warehouse and climbed back into the quiet sanctuary of my truck. I rolled up the windows, blocking out the industrial noise of the loading bays, and pulled my phone back out. I opened my encrypted banking application, verified my secure credentials, and then dialed my private wealth manager. He answered immediately. "Good morning, Gwendolyn," he said. "How is the supply run going?" I need to make a corporate acquisition today, I told him, staring through my windshield at the massive Horizon Agricultural logo painted on the side of the warehouse. I need you to contact the primary owners of Horizon Agricultural Distributors. I know the founder has been looking to retire and quietly seeking a buyer for the past 8 months. I want to execute a hostile, immediate cash buyout of their entire supply chain infrastructure. My wealth manager did not even hesitate. The power of having a $50 million liquid trust fund meant that doors did not just open for me, they were completely ripped off their hinges. Consider it done, he replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the phone. I will offer them a premium above market value for a 24-hour closing window. How much capital should I authorize for the initial acquisition? Offer them $4 million liquid cash. I commanded, my eyes locked on the glass window of Greg's office in the distance. Wire the funds the exact second the legal transfer clears. I want full controlling ownership of this entire distribution network by the end of the business day. I ended the call and leaned back against the headrest of my truck, letting out a soft, highly satisfied laugh. Trey thought he could use his money to build a massive wall around me to starve me out. He had no idea that I had enough capital to simply buy the wall and lock him outside. I took one last look at the massive warehouse in front of me. I was no longer just a blacklisted customer. As of this afternoon, I was the undisputed boss of the entire supply chain. The next morning, I did not wear my soil-stained overalls. I dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored slate gray suit, pairing it with my sturdy steel-toed work boots. I drove my transport truck back into the massive loading bay of Horizon Agricultural Distributors. The facility was bustling with early morning activity, forklifts beeping loudly and heavy pallets of fertilizer being loaded onto flatbed trucks. I bypassed the main customer service counter and walked straight up the metal staircase toward the glass-enclosed regional management office. The door was already open. Inside, Greg was frantically pacing behind his heavy oak desk, a phone pressed tightly against his ear. His face was the color of wet ash. He hung up the phone the exact second I walked through the door. The corporate memo detailing the immediate cash buyout had been distributed company-wide at 6 in the morning. He knew exactly who I was now. I did not wait for him to offer a pathetic apology or try to justify his actions from the day before. I walked over to his desk, picked up the small metal trash can, and placed it right on top of his keyboard. Pack your personal belongings. Greg, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You tore up my legal purchase order yesterday to protect your job. Today I own the building, the inventory, and your employment contract. You are officially terminated effective immediately. Leave the premises before I have security escort you out into the street. Greg opened his mouth to speak, but the absolute coldness in my eyes stopped him entirely. He grabbed his coat and hurried out the door without a single word. I sat down in the heavy leather executive chair, adjusted the monitor, and logged into the primary corporate distribution database using my new administrative credentials. The system displayed every active commercial account in the state. I typed Trey's real estate development firm into the search bar. The screen quickly populated with dozens of active massive supply orders. Trey relied heavily on Horizon Agricultural for all his high-end condo developments across the city. He desperately needed our imported turf-specialized irrigation piping and mature oak trees to complete his luxury landscaping. Without these specific materials, his building projects could not pass final city inspections, which meant he could not legally sell a single finished condo. I selected his master corporate account. With 3 simple keystrokes, I initiated a total irreversible block on his profile. I did not stop there. I pulled up the live GPS tracking map for the company freight trucks. 2 heavy transport vehicles were currently en route to Trey's largest downtown construction site, loaded with $70,000 worth of essential landscaping materials. I picked up the dispatch radio on the desk. This is the new owner speaking, I announced to the fleet. Trucks 4 and 7, turn your vehicles around immediately and return all cargo to the warehouse. The Pierce real estate account is officially frozen. It took less than 2 hours for the absolute chaos to reach my doorstep. The heavy glass door to my new office flew open so violently it slammed hard against the wall. Trey stormed into the room, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. His expensive designer suit jacket was unbuttoned, and he was gripping his smartphone so tightly his knuckles were turning white. "What kind of insane game are you playing?" Gwendolyn Trey shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "My site foreman just called me in a complete panic. Your dispatchers ordered 2 fully loaded freight trucks to turn around in the middle of the highway. You just halted construction on a $50 million luxury high-rise project." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly on the desk. "I am not playing any games, Trey," I replied smoothly. "You told Greg to permanently blacklist me from purchasing botanical supplies. I simply acquired the supply chain to ensure my own business operations could continue unhindered. And as the new controlling owner of this facility, I reserve the right to refuse service to any client I deem a liability." Trey slammed his hands down flat on my desk, leaning over to try and intimidate me with his physical presence. "You do not have the right to do anything," he snarled, his deep voice echoing loudly off the glass walls. "I have ironclad signed commercial contracts with Horizon Agricultural. We have guaranteed delivery dates. If you delay my materials by even a single day, you are going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in municipal construction fines. I will drag you into a corporate courtroom and sue you for massive breach of contract. I will legally bury you and your stupid little plant business until you are living on the streets." I did not flinch at his highly aggressive posture. I calmly opened the top drawer of the desk, pulled out a thick printed copy of Trey's original corporate supply agreement, and slid it directly across the polished wood toward him. "I highly suggest you read Section 4, Paragraph 12 of your own master service agreement." "Trey," I instructed, tapping the specific clause with my index finger. Trey looked down at the paper, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. The arrogant flush slowly began to drain from his face as he read the words out loud in his head. "That is the hostile interference clause," I explained cheerfully. "It explicitly states that if a buyer uses threats, extortion, or aggressive market manipulation to intentionally harm the business operations of the supplier or its affiliates, the supplier reserves the right to instantly terminate the contract with zero financial penalty. When you aggressively threaten the former regional manager to completely blacklist my independent nursery, you blatantly violated your own terms of service. Your contracts are legally void. You are not getting a single blade of grass from this facility ever again." Trey stared at the voided contract, his chest heaving, as the catastrophic reality of his situation finally set in. Without materials, his construction sites would sit completely idle. His luxury developments would stall, and his investors would demand immediate, highly uncomfortable answers. But men like Trey never know when to quit. He stood up straight, his face contorting into a vicious, desperate sneer. "You think a minor supply chain delay is going to stop me?" he growled, pulling his phone back out of his pocket. "I am a premier real estate developer. I have access to capital you cannot even comprehend. I will just call my primary lender right now, secure a massive commercial bridge loan, and import double the materials from out of state. I will bury you with sheer financial force, Gwendolyn." I sat back in my chair, offering him a bright, completely serene smile. "By all means, Trey," I said, gesturing politely toward his phone. "Make the call." I watched him dial the number, pacing around my office as the line rang, completely oblivious to the fact that he was actively digging his own financial grave. Trey secured his $30 million commercial bridge loan by noon that exact same day. He leveraged my father's entire retirement portfolio and every single asset Sylvia had attached her greedy hands to. He truly believed he was an invincible titan of real estate who had just outmaneuvered a simple botanist. Within 48 hours, out of state, freight trucks began rolling down the valley road. Since I had permanently blacklisted him from the local agricultural supply chain, Trey was forced to import his materials at a staggering astronomical premium. The deafening roar of heavy machinery quickly returned to the 50-acre plot. Trey was back to building his ridiculous eco-resort, determined to construct massive Olympic-sized luxury swimming pools and a sprawling 18-hole golf course right over the footprint of my grandfather's historical botanical gardens. For a few short weeks, it actually looked like Trey was winning his desperate gamble. The deep concrete foundations for his massive swimming pools were poured and cured. The sprawling acres of imported incredibly high-maintenance turf were rolled out across the dry valley floor, transforming the natural landscape into an artificial manicured playground. But a luxury eco-resort of that enormous magnitude requires a truly astronomical amount of fresh water to simply survive. It needs hundreds of thousands of gallons every single day to fill the resort pools, power the massive decorative waterfalls, run the plumbing for the luxury suites, and keep the imported golf course grass from turning brown under the relentless afternoon sun. Trey confidently ordered his site foreman to engage the massive industrial water pumps located at the very edge of the property. He fully intended to tap directly into the deep local aquifer flowing right beneath the valley, just as my grandfather had done for decades, to water his rare orchids. The foreman flipped the heavy electrical breakers. The massive pump engines hummed to life with a powerful vibration. But absolutely nothing came out of the intake pipes. The pressure gauges remained at zero. The main utility valves connecting the property to the underground aquifer were tightly locked shut with heavy, highly secure municipal padlocks. Trey was absolutely livid. He assumed it was a simple bureaucratic oversight, a minor clerical error delaying his grand opening and costing him thousands of dollars a day in idle construction time. He summoned his slick corporate lawyer Gordon, and the two of them marched straight down to the county municipal water and zoning office. They completely bypassed the standard customer service line in the lobby, demanding to speak directly to the regional director of utilities. Trey slammed his fist down hard onto the director's desk, shouting at the top of his lungs about his incredibly tight timeline, his massive financial investment, and his absolute legal dominion over the resort property. He aggressively waved his freshly signed copy of the deed transfer right in the director's face. He screamed that he was the sole legal owner of Pierce Land LLC, which meant he possessed every single rock, every single blade of grass, and every single drop of water on that entire 50-acre plot. Gordon stood right beside him, pointing his finger and threatening to file a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the entire city for intentionally obstructing a major commercial development. The regional director, a calm, deeply experienced man who had dealt with screaming arrogant developers for over 30 years, did not even blink. He patiently waited for Trey to finish his loud, red-faced tantrum. Then the director slowly opened a heavy, dust-covered municipal ledger containing the original master property records for the entire valley. He turned the heavy yellowed pages and placed his index finger on a highly specific notarized legal addendum filed over 2 decades ago. He looked up at Trey and Gordon with a look of profound, almost pitying amusement. "You own the surface dirt," the director explained smoothly, keeping his voice perfectly level. "You own the commercial liability, and you own the right to build whatever physical structures the zoning board allows. But you do not own a single drop of the water underneath it." Gordon frowned deeply, aggressively, leaning over the desk to read the ancient ledger for himself. "What on earth are you talking about? Land ownership automatically includes the local utility and water rights. This is basic property law. Not when those rights have been legally and permanently severed," the director corrected him sharply. "Your father-in-law's father, Winston Pierce, was an incredibly shrewd man. 20 years ago, he filed a binding legal motion to permanently sever the subterranean water rights from the surface property deed. He placed the absolute exclusive rights to tap the valley aquifer into a completely separate, ironclad blind trust. You can build all the luxury swimming pools, spas, and golf courses you want on the surface, Trey. But without explicit written permission from the legal owner of that blind trust, you are federally forbidden from extracting a single ounce of water from the ground. Furthermore, the city cannot route new municipal water lines to your property without violating strict federal conservation laws protecting that specific aquifer. Your $30 million luxury resort is legally a desert." The blood completely drained from Trey's arrogant face. His mind raced as the catastrophic reality set in. His $30 million luxury resort, currently baking under the hot sun, was completely and utterly dry. The highly expensive imported turf was already beginning to wilt and die. The massive concrete pools were just empty, useless, dusty craters. He looked at Gordon in absolute panic, realizing that a five-star wellness resort without running water for its guests, its pools or its landscaping was essentially a massive, worthless graveyard of concrete and dead grass. "Who owns the blind trust?" Trey demanded, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "I have $30 million on the line. I am paying astronomical interest rates every single day. Tell me who controls the water so I can buy them out right now. Name the price." The regional director closed the heavy ledger and opened his top desk drawer. He pulled out a crisp white business card and slid it across the polished wood directly toward Trey. Trey picked up the card with trembling fingers. He stared at the bold black ink printed across the center. It was not the name of a faceless corporate entity, a federal conservation group, or a wealthy municipal investor. It was my name, Gwendolyn Pierce. Trey stood perfectly still in the middle of the municipal office, clutching the small piece of cardboard as the horrifying reality crashed down on him. I held the predatory mortgage that was currently draining his family bank accounts, and I exclusively owned the only water source that could possibly save his failing business. The noose was tightening rapidly around his neck, and he was completely out of breath. I stood in my truck, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. I put my vehicle in drive, gently pressing the accelerator, and rolled away down the mountain road, leaving them to drown in the very dirt they had tried to steal from me. The deafening roar of heavy diesel engines shattered the quiet tranquility of the early morning. I stood just inside the main entrance of the conservatory, carefully placing the last of my ghost orchids into a temperature-controlled transport crate. The ground beneath my boots vibrated as a fleet of massive yellow bulldozers and excavators rolled down the private gravel driveway. Trey was not wasting a single second. He had forced my signature on the deed transfer barely 24 hours ago, and he was already here to claim his prize and break ground on his ridiculous luxury resort. I secured the latch on the final crate and pushed my heavy utility cart out into the crisp morning air. The scene unfolding in front of my grandfather's historic property was a masterclass in profound arrogance. Trey was standing on the hood of his custom black SUV, wearing an immaculately tailored suit, paired with a pristine white hard hat that had clearly never seen a day of actual labor. He was shouting orders at a team of construction foremen who looked thoroughly annoyed by his theatrical behavior. Right beside him, wearing designer activewear and oversized sunglasses, was Kelsey. She was holding her smartphone at the end of an expensive gimbal, actively live streaming to her thousands of followers. She spun around in circles, making sure to capture the massive bulldozers and the towering glass structure of my greenhouse in the background. "Welcome to the future site of the Kelsey Trey Eco Resort, you guys," she squealed into her camera, her voice overly loud and grating. "My incredible husband just acquired this massive 50-acre plot right in the heart of the valley. We are going to tear down this hideous, outdated weed farm and build the most exclusive wellness retreat in the state. Stay tuned for the demolition. It is going to be absolutely iconic." I rolled my cart down the pathway, my sturdy boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Kelsey spotted me and immediately shoved her camera directly into my face, her lips curled into a vicious smirk. "Say goodbye to your little mud hut," Gwendolyn, Kelsey taunted, making sure her followers had a clear view of my dirt-stained overalls. "It is time for you to pack up your weeds and vacate the premises. Real business owners are taking over now." Trey hopped down from the hood of his vehicle and strutted over to join his wife. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at my transport crates with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "I told you I was going to flatten this place," Trey boasted, his deep voice carrying over the rumble of the idling excavators. "You should be grateful I gave you the morning to gather your pathetic little houseplants. Now take your dirt and leave before I have my crew bulldoze your truck along with the glasshouse." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of protest. I looked at Kelsey's phone camera, offered a polite, completely serene smile, and then looked directly into Trey's gloating eyes. "I am leaving right now," I said, my tone perfectly even. "The property is all yours, Trey. I highly recommend you start digging immediately. You would not want to delay your grand vision. Trey let out a booming laugh, slapping the side of my utility cart. See, Kelsey. I told you she would finally learn her place. Get out of here, Gwendolyn. Here. I loaded my crates into the back of my heavy-duty transport truck, secured the tailgate, and climbed into the driver's seat. I started the engine and slowly pulled out of the main gate. I did not drive far. I pulled onto the elevated shoulder of the public access road just outside the property line, parking my truck, where I had a perfect unobstructed view of the entire valley. I rolled down my window, letting the cool morning breeze fill the cabin, and pressed the hands-free calling button on my dashboard console. My private wealth manager and lead legal counsel answered on the very first ring. "Good morning, Gwendolyn," he said smoothly. "I see the GPS tracker on your truck shows you are off the main property. Has the transfer been fully executed?" The ink is dry, and Trey is currently standing in front of 3 massive excavators. I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the construction crew below. "Confirm the legal structure for me one more time. I want to enjoy this." My lawyer chuckled the sound crisp through the truck speakers. "Your grandfather Winston was an absolute visionary. When he purchased that specific 50-acre plot decades ago, it was heavily contaminated by an old industrial chemical spill from the 1970s. He spent a fortune cleaning the soil to make it safe for botanical research, but the federal liability never vanished." He paused, clearly relishing the legal brilliance of the setup. "Your grandfather created Pierce Land, LLC, as a highly specific containment shell. Under federal law, as long as the land remained zoned strictly for agricultural and botanical conservation, the property was completely tax-exempt and legally protected. But the LLC carries a dormant mandatory environmental cleanup penalty. The exact second that land is rezoned for commercial real estate, or the moment commercial construction breaks ground, a hidden $15 million federal tax liability is instantly triggered. And since Trey forced you to sign over the LLC entirely to his name, he just assumed total legal and financial responsibility for the federal debt." I watched from my truck as Trey proudly threw his arm around Kelsey, posing for another photo. He turned to his lead foreman and gave a loud, enthusiastic signal. "Tear it up!" Trey shouted. The massive yellow bulldozer roared to life. Its heavy steel treads dug deep into the earth. The hydraulic arm lowered, and the massive metal bucket smashed violently into the pristine soil of the valley. The operator pulled the lever, tearing a massive, gaping trench into the ground and turning over the very first pile of earth for commercial development. The trap was sprung. Before the bulldozer could even lift its bucket for a second scoop, the distinct piercing wail of heavy sirens echoed down the valley road. I leaned forward against my steering wheel, resting my chin on my hands, completely mesmerized by the show. A fleet of 6 black, heavily armored government SUVs with federal license plates came speeding down the private gravel driveway. They moved with aggressive, terrifying precision, surrounding the construction equipment and kicking up a massive cloud of dust. The sirens blared loudly, completely drowning out the sound of the diesel engines. "Shut off the machines right now!" the lead federal agent bellowed through a megaphone. "Step away from the equipment. This is a federally protected environmental zone." Trey rushed forward, his face flushed with panicked anger. "What is the meaning of this? I own this land. I am a commercial developer, and you are trespassing on private property." The lead agent holstered his megaphone and pulled a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents from his jacket. He marched directly up to Trey and shoved the paperwork hard into his chest. "You are the registered owner of Pierce Land, LLC," the agent stated loudly. "You just initiated unauthorized commercial excavation on a restricted environmental liability zone. By breaking this soil, you have officially triggered the dormant federal cleanup clause. You are hereby served with an immediate cease and desist order and a mandatory federal tax liability citation in the amount of $15 million. This fine is payable immediately, and your personal assets are subject to federal seizure until the debt is cleared." The color completely drained from Trey's face. He looked down at the massive $15 million federal citation in his trembling hands, his mouth opening and closing in absolute speechless horror. Kelsey let out a piercing shriek, clutching her head as the federal agents began placing bright yellow lockdown tape across the bulldozers. I sat in my truck, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. I put my vehicle in drive, gently pressing the accelerator, and rolled away down the mountain road, leaving them to drown in the very dirt they had tried to steal from me. Trey did not take the news of my absolute control over the valley aquifer with anything resembling grace. When he returned to the lavish mansion he shared with Kelsey and my father, the ensuing panic was practically tectonic. I heard the specific details later from my wealth manager, who had been quietly monitoring their increasingly erratic financial maneuvers. Trey had hit a solid brick wall. He could not build his ridiculous luxury resort without water, and he certainly could not afford the astronomical daily interest rates on the $30 million subprime bridge loan that I now secretly owned. Cornered and bleeding capital at a catastrophic rate, my stepmother Sylvia and her golden child daughter decided to deploy the absolute only weapon they had left in their arsenal: public manipulation. If they could not beat me in a boardroom or a municipal zoning office, they would try to completely destroy me in the court of public opinion. Kelsey initiated the coordinated assault using her massive social media platform. The very next morning, she posted a highly produced, tearful video to her hundreds of thousands of followers. She sat on her plush velvet sofa wearing minimal makeup and an oversized sweater to appear authentically distressed, and spun a deeply malicious narrative. She claimed that her sweet elderly stepfather Donovan was being systematically abused and financially ruined by his estranged, incredibly greedy daughter. Kelsey cried directly into the camera lens, weaving a completely fabricated tale about how I had deceitfully stolen my father's land and vital water rights right out from under him. She told her massive audience that I was intentionally trying to bankrupt my own flesh and blood out of sheer unprovoked jealousy over her beautiful new eco-resort. Within a matter of hours, the video had gone completely viral, racking up millions of views and thousands of angry comments directed at my business pages. But Sylvia was not content with just an angry internet mob. She wanted to utterly obliterate my professional reputation in the real world. Leveraging her extensive high society connections, Sylvia secured a massive feature in the city's most prominent luxury lifestyle and business magazine. The publication was widely read by the exact demographic of wealthy elites who funded botanical conservation grants and purchased high-end, six-figure landscaping contracts. The magazine ran a scathing front-page exposé titled "The Green Greed." The article painted me as a ruthless, calculated monster engaged in severe elder abuse. Sylvia provided the journalist with completely out-of-context documents, falsely alleging that I had forged my late grandfather's blind trust to hoard the valley's natural resources and hold my poor, unsuspecting family hostage. The public backlash was swift and incredibly severe. By noon on Wednesday, the phone lines at my newly acquired corporate office were ringing off the hook. Several of my most prestigious botanical clients, the ones who had commissioned massive conservation projects, called my administrative team to express their deep, immediate concern. A few even threatened to pause our active contracts pending a formal investigation into the elder abuse allegations. They simply could not afford to have their philanthropic reputations tied to a woman accused of terrorizing her own elderly father for financial gain. To make matters exponentially worse, Donovan decided to make his grand public debut as the ultimate victim. Guided by Sylvia's manipulative hand, my father appeared on a highly rated local morning news broadcast. He sat in a pristine studio chair, looking intentionally disheveled and frail. When the anchor asked him about the land dispute, Donovan actually produced real tears. He wept on live television, claiming he had given me everything, only for me to abandon him in his twilight years and steal the vital water rights to the family estate. He pleaded directly into the camera for me to remember the importance of family and to stop this ruthless financial crusade before he lost his only home. It was a masterful, sickeningly effective performance. They were actively trying to weaponize public shame to force me into surrendering the water rights and forgiving Trey's massive commercial debt. They wanted to make the social pressure so absolutely unbearable that I would fold and hand them the keys to my entire empire, just to make the public nightmare stop. My lead legal counsel and my private wealth manager immediately scheduled an emergency conference call with me. They were deeply concerned about the rapidly deteriorating situation and the impact on my business revenues. The lawyer strongly advised that we issue an immediate, highly aggressive public relations statement refuting the magazine article point by point. He wanted to release the official court documents, proving my grandfather's trust was ironclad and entirely legal. My wealth manager suggested we file a massive defamation lawsuit against Kelsey Sylvia and the publication itself to halt the vicious smear campaign in its tracks. I sat at my heavy executive desk looking out the large glass window at my sprawling nursery operations. I listened patiently as they outlined their traditional, highly reactive legal strategies. When they finally finished speaking, the line fell silent, waiting for my explicit approval to launch the PR defense. I am not going to issue a public relations statement, I told them, my voice completely calm and devoid of the panic they clearly expected. And we are not going to waste months fighting a tedious defamation lawsuit in civil court. Lawsuits give them a platform to continue playing the victim for the cameras. I am not going to argue with people who write lies for a living. My lawyer sounded thoroughly confused. Gwendolyn, you cannot just let this article stand unanswered. It is doing real quantifiable damage to your professional reputation and your bottom line. If you do not respond, the public will automatically assume their allegations of elder abuse are entirely true. I am going to respond, I corrected him smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair. I just refuse to use their outdated methods. I pulled up the financial background of the media conglomerate on my computer monitor. Find out exactly who owns the parent company of the luxury magazine that published Sylvia's ridiculous defamatory article. My wealth manager typed rapidly for a few seconds, the clicking echoing over the phone line. It is a regional media group, he replied. They own that specific luxury magazine along with a few local radio stations and high-traffic lifestyle blogs. They are currently valued at roughly $7 million, but their profit margins have been steadily declining for the past 2 quarters due to poor management. Perfect, I said, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips. I do not want to sue them for defamation. I want you to dip into the blind trust and acquire the entire parent company. Buy a controlling majority of their corporate shares before the stock market closes today. Offer them an all-cash premium they cannot possibly refuse. There was a stunned, heavy silence on the other end of the encrypted phone line. You want to buy the entire media company? My wealth manager asked, his voice laced with a mixture of shock and profound professional admiration. Yes, I confirmed, closing the browser window on my computer. Sylvia thinks she can use the press to publicly bully me into submission. She is about to learn exactly what happens when I become the press. Execute the acquisition immediately. The very next morning, after I had them publicly escorted out of my newly acquired hotel, the financial bleeding on Trey's end accelerated from a steady drip to a catastrophic hemorrhage. His massive resort project was completely paralyzed. You cannot mix industrial concrete, run heavy excavation machinery, or sustain imported landscaping without hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. Since I owned the exclusive legal rights to the Valley Aquifer and absolutely refused to grant him access, his construction site had rapidly devolved into a massive, dusty graveyard of idle bulldozers and dying grass. Every single day that his luxury project sat dormant, Trey was burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest alone on the $30 million commercial bridge loan he had taken out. What Trey still did not understand was that he owed that astronomical debt directly to me. I had purchased his subprime mortgage through a blind proxy. I was his bank. And because I was his primary lender, I possessed absolute unrestricted legal access to every single financial document, withdrawal request, and expense ledger associated with his construction loan. I sat in my spacious corner office at the agricultural distribution center I had recently acquired, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows over the busy loading bays. Across the polished oak desk sat David, a ruthlessly efficient forensic accountant I had flown in specifically from New York. I had hired him to conduct a total microscopic audit of Trey's loan disbursements. David opened a thick, heavily tabbed binder and slid it across the desk toward me. He looked simultaneously fascinated and deeply disgusted by what he had painstakingly uncovered during his investigation. "Your brother-in-law is either incredibly desperate or profoundly arrogant," David stated, adjusting his glasses. "When commercial developers take out massive construction loans, they have to request periodic financial draws from the lender. They submit invoices for building materials or contractor labor, and the bank releases the requested funds." Since Trey firmly believes he is dealing with a faceless, predatory subprime lender that does not care about the fine print as long as the interest payments clear, he has gotten unbelievably sloppy. I opened the binder and began scanning the brightly highlighted transaction logs. "What exactly am I looking at, David?" "You are looking at massive, highly coordinated federal wire fraud," David replied smoothly. "Over the past 3 weeks, Trey has submitted withdrawal requests for over $2 million in so-called contractor fees and specialized material acquisitions. But the money is not going to construction crews or heavy machinery vendors. He is actively routing the borrowed funds through a complex series of newly registered shell companies, and the final destination of that capital is entirely personal." I flipped to the next page, my eyes widening slightly as I read the highly detailed expenditure reports. David pointed to a specific line item on the spreadsheet. Trey submitted an invoice for $80,000 claiming it was for high-grade imported Italian marble for the resort lobby. The money was actually wired directly to an exclusive boutique in Beverly Hills to purchase 4 limited-edition designer handbags and a diamond-encrusted stroller for Kelsey's upcoming baby. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet office. They were literally stealing commercial construction funds to maintain their fake, wealthy lifestyle for her social media followers. It gets much worse. David continued turning the page for me to reveal another set of highlighted documents. Last week, Trey authorized a massive draw of $150,000, explicitly coding it as payment for heavy excavation machinery rentals. The actual recipient of those funds was a premier ultra-luxury plastic surgery clinic in Miami. The clinic specializes in high-end cosmetic lifts and intensive facial reconstruction. The patient listed on the secure medical billing transfer is Sylvia. I stared at the financial documentation, completely mesmerized by their sheer, unadulterated stupidity. My greedy stepmother had used stolen commercial loan money secured against my own father's entire retirement portfolio to pay for her latest round of cosmetic enhancements. They were burning through borrowed millions to fund shallow shopping sprees and extreme vanity surgeries, while their actual business venture was collapsing in the dirt. "This is not just a simple breach of contract," David explained, his voice turning incredibly serious. "This is textbook embezzlement and federal wire fraud. Trey is using highly fraudulent corporate invoices to siphon millions of dollars from a commercial lender across state lines for personal enrichment. If he goes down for this, Sylvia goes down with him as a direct, willing co-conspirator. As the legal owner of the debt, you are obligated to report this. We need to freeze the remaining loan funds immediately and hand this entire binder directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The authorities will have him in handcuffs before dinner." I closed the heavy binder, tracing my finger over the smooth leather cover. The temptation to pick up my phone and call the federal authorities right that exact second was incredibly strong. I could end it all today. I could watch Trey get hauled out of his luxury mansion in heavy iron chains, completely disgraced, while Sylvia and Kelsey lost absolutely everything they held dear. But calling the police right now meant Trey would undoubtedly try to negotiate a favorable plea deal. He would claim sudden financial desperation. He would hire Gordon, his aggressive lawyer, to stall the criminal proceedings in court for years. He might even try to throw Sylvia under the bus to save his own skin. I did not want them to have any leverage whatsoever. I did not want them to have a single microscopic chance of negotiating their way out of the financial hell they had dug for themselves. "Do not call the authorities," I told David, sliding the binder back across the polished desk. David looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Gwendolyn, they are actively stealing your money. They are committing serious, undeniable federal crimes as we speak." "I know exactly what they are doing," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and measured. "But right now, the amount they have embezzled is just enough to get them a few years in a minimum security facility. I want them to feel completely invincible. I want them to firmly believe they have successfully outsmarted the entire financial system. If we cut them off now, the panic sets in and they run. If we let them keep stealing, the federal charges multiply exponentially. I turned my chair and logged into my secure lending portal on my computer monitor. I found Trey's latest pending withdrawal request. He was asking for another $500,000, supposedly, for advanced water filtration systems. I knew for an absolute fact he could not install water systems without water rights. I moved my mouse over the screen and clicked the bright green button to instantly approve the $500,000 wire transfer. Approve every single draw request he submits. I ordered, David, leaning forward. Do not question his invoices. Do not flag his accounts. Give him absolute unrestricted access to the remaining capital. Let Sylvia buy more designer clothes. Let Trey fund more fake shell companies. Let them gorge themselves on the stolen money until they are so incredibly bloated with federal crimes that no lawyer on earth can save them. David slowly closed his briefcase, a look of profound professional respect crossing his face. You are handing them a tremendous amount of rope. I am not handing them rope. I smiled, looking back out the window. I am handing them a shovel, and I am going to let them dig their own graves until the walls cave in on them. For the next 3 weeks, I watched the financial dashboard in my office like a hawk. Trey continued to submit highly fraudulent withdrawal requests, and I approved every single one of them without a moment of hesitation. He was blindly feeding his own destruction, completely unaware that the global economy was about to hand me the absolute perfect weapon. On a brisk Tuesday morning, the United States Federal Reserve made a highly anticipated aggressive announcement. To combat rising inflation, they initiated a massive hike in the national interest rate. For the average citizen, this meant slightly higher credit card bills. But for arrogant commercial developers holding massive subprime variable rate bridge loans, it was an absolute financial death sentence. My private wealth manager called me less than 10 minutes after the federal broadcast hit the news networks. Because Trey had been so incredibly desperate to secure the $30 million to bypass the environmental fines and keep his resort project moving, he had signed a predatory loan contract with virtually no protective caps. He had eagerly agreed to a variable interest rate that fluctuated daily based directly on the federal index. I pulled up Trey's master loan file on my computer monitor, watching the numbers shift in real time. The automated system just recalculated his minimum monthly payment. My wealth manager reported, his voice tight with professional anticipation. His debt servicing obligation just quadrupled overnight. His new massively inflated payment is due by 5 o'clock this afternoon, and it will automatically pull from the primary collateral accounts. The accounts tied to my father's retirement and Sylvia's personal assets, I confirmed smoothly, leaning back in my leather executive chair. Exactly, he replied. Do I authorize the automatic withdrawal? Process it immediately, I commanded. Drain the accounts. Later that afternoon, I drove my heavy-duty transport truck into the exclusive, highly gated suburban neighborhood where my father and Sylvia lived. I had a perfectly legitimate reason to be there. One of my highest-paying botanical clients lived exactly 2 houses down from their sprawling, ostentatious mansion, and I was personally delivering a rare, mature Japanese maple tree for her front courtyard. As my landscaping crew carefully unloaded the massive tree, a sudden, incredibly violent shouting match erupted down the pristine tree-lined street. I handed my client her botanical care instructions and quietly walked down the sidewalk, staying perfectly concealed behind a thick row of highly manicured cedar hedges. In the wide circular driveway of my father's estate, total chaos was rapidly unfolding. Trey was pacing back and forth furiously in front of his luxury SUV, his hands pulling aggressively at his expensive tie. My father, Donovan, was standing on the front porch, clutching a tablet computer to his chest and looking like he was about to suffer a massive heart attack. Sylvia stood right behind him, her face completely pale, clutching her designer silk robe tightly around herself. Several wealthy neighbors had already stepped out onto their pristine lawns, watching the explosive spectacle with eager, highly judgmental eyes. Where did the money go, Trey? My father screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. I just got an emergency alert from my primary banking institution. The automatic withdrawal for your resort loan just completely wiped out my entire liquid retirement portfolio. The payment was 4 times higher than what you promised me. You drained everything I have left. Trey stopped pacing and pointed an aggressive finger right back at my father. Do not yell at me, Donovan. The Federal Reserve just hiked the rates. It is a temporary market fluctuation. I am managing a $30 million commercial development. You cannot panic over a single adjusted payment cycle. A single payment cycle just vaporized 30 years of my life savings. My father roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. We put this entire house up as collateral. If we miss the very next payment, the bank is going to instantly foreclose on us. You said the resort was weeks away from opening. You said we were fully funded. Sylvia stepped forward, her voice shrill and trembling with sheer terror. Trey, you have to fix this right now. If I lose this house and become a laughingstock in front of my friends, I will personally ruin you. Trey let out a harsh, desperate laugh. He was completely cornered like a wild animal. He stepped much closer to my father, lowering his voice, but in the quiet, echoing suburban street, I could hear every single word perfectly through the cedar hedges. Everyone needs to calm down and listen to me right now. Trey hissed, his eyes darting nervously toward the watching neighbors. I have a backup plan. I am hosting an exclusive high-tier VIP investor gala at the resort site this coming Saturday night. I have invited the wealthiest private equity angels in the entire state. I am going to pitch them a minor expansion opportunity and secure $20 million in emergency capital to float the loan. My father stared at him in absolute disbelief. Are you completely insane? You cannot bring wealthy investors to that construction site. You do not have any water rights. The massive luxury pools are just empty concrete pits. The imported golf course is literally dying in the sun as we speak. No sane investor is going to hand you $20 million for a bone-dry resort. Trey grabbed my father by the shoulders, his face twisted into a mask of pure, reckless arrogance. They do not know about the water rights, Donovan, and they are never going to find out. I hired a specialized event lighting crew to completely disguise the empty pools and the dead grass. I am going to tell the investors that the water hookups are experiencing a minor municipal delay that will be resolved next week. I just need them to sign the emergency funding checks before they realize the truth. Once the cash clears the bank, we pay the loan and we figure the rest out later. I stood completely still behind the thick cedar hedges, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Trey was officially preparing to commit massive, highly orchestrated investor fraud on a grand scale. He was going to put all his desperate lies on a silver platter and serve them directly to the most ruthless financial predators in the city. I quietly turned around and walked back to my truck. Trey wanted to host an exclusive VIP gala to save his fraudulent empire. I decided it was time to go shopping for the perfect evening gown because there was absolutely no way I was going to miss that party. Trey stormed out of the municipal office, crushing my business card in his fist. When he returned to the lavish mansion he shared with Kelsey and my father, the ensuing panic was practically tectonic. I heard the specific details later from my wealth manager, who had been quietly monitoring their increasingly erratic financial maneuvers. Trey had hit a solid brick wall. He could not build his ridiculous luxury resort without water, and he certainly could not afford the astronomical daily interest rates on the $30 million subprime bridge loan that I now secretly owned. Cornered and bleeding capital at a catastrophic rate, my stepmother Sylvia and her golden child daughter decided to deploy the absolute only weapon they had left in their arsenal: public manipulation. If they could not beat me in a boardroom or a municipal zoning office, they would try to completely destroy me in the court of public opinion. Kelsey initiated the coordinated assault using her massive social media platform. The very next morning, she posted a highly produced, tearful video to her hundreds of thousands of followers. She sat on her plush velvet sofa, wearing minimal makeup and an oversized sweater to appear authentically distressed, and spun a deeply malicious narrative. She claimed that her sweet elderly stepfather Donovan was being systematically abused and financially ruined by his estranged, incredibly greedy daughter. Kelsey cried directly into the camera lens, weaving a completely fabricated tale about how I had deceitfully stolen my father's land and vital water rights right out from under him. She told her massive audience that I was intentionally trying to bankrupt my own flesh and blood out of sheer, unprovoked jealousy over her beautiful new eco resort. Within a matter of hours, the video had gone completely viral, racking up millions of views and thousands of angry comments directed at my business pages. But Sylvia was not content with just an angry internet mob. She wanted to utterly obliterate my professional reputation in the real world. Leveraging her extensive high society connections, Sylvia secured a massive feature in the city's most prominent luxury lifestyle and business magazine. The publication was widely read by the exact demographic of wealthy elites who funded botanical conservation grants and purchased high-end six-figure landscaping contracts. The magazine ran a scathing front-page exposé. The article painted me as a ruthless, calculated monster engaged in severe elder abuse. Sylvia provided the journalist with completely out-of-context documents, falsely alleging that I had forged my late grandfather's blind trust to hoard the valley's natural resources and hold my poor, unsuspecting family hostage. The public backlash was swift and incredibly severe. By noon on Wednesday, the phone lines at my newly acquired corporate office were ringing off the hook. Several of my most prestigious botanical clients, the ones who had commissioned massive conservation projects, called my administrative team to express their deep, immediate concern. A few even threatened to pause our active contracts, pending a formal investigation into the elder abuse allegations. They simply could not afford to have their philanthropic reputations tied to a woman accused of terrorizing her own elderly father for financial gain. To make matters exponentially worse, Donovan decided to make his grand public debut as the ultimate victim. Guided by Sylvia's manipulative hand, my father appeared on a highly rated local morning news broadcast. He sat in a pristine studio chair looking intentionally disheveled and frail. When the anchor asked him about the land dispute, Donovan actually produced real tears. He wept on live television, claiming he had given me everything only for me to abandon him in his twilight years and steal the vital water rights to the family estate. He pleaded directly into the camera for me to remember the importance of family and to stop this ruthless financial crusade before he lost his only home. It was a masterful, sickeningly effective performance. They were actively trying to weaponize public shame to force me into surrendering the water rights and forgiving Trey's massive commercial debt. They wanted to make the social pressure so absolutely unbearable that I would fold and hand them the keys to my entire empire just to make the public nightmare stop. My lead legal counsel and my private wealth manager immediately scheduled an emergency conference call with me. They were deeply concerned about the rapidly deteriorating situation and the impact on my business revenues. The lawyer strongly advised that we issue an immediate, highly aggressive public relations statement refuting the magazine article point by point. He wanted to release the official court documents, proving my grandfather's trust was ironclad and entirely legal. My wealth manager suggested we file a massive defamation lawsuit against Kelsey Sylvia and the publication itself to halt the vicious smear campaign in its tracks. I sat at my heavy executive desk, looking out the large glass window at my sprawling nursery operations. I listened patiently as they outlined their traditional, highly reactive legal strategies. When they finally finished speaking, the line fell silent, waiting for my explicit approval to launch the public relations defense. I am not going to issue a public relations statement, I told them, my voice completely calm and devoid of the panic they clearly expected. And we are not going to waste months fighting a tedious defamation lawsuit in civil court. Lawsuits give them a platform to continue playing the victim for the cameras. I am not going to argue with people who write lies for a living. My lawyer sounded thoroughly confused. Gwendolyn, you cannot just let this article stand unanswered. It is doing real quantifiable damage to your professional reputation and your bottom line. If you do not respond, the public will automatically assume their allegations of elder abuse are entirely true. I am going to respond. I corrected him smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair. I just refuse to use their outdated methods. I pulled up the financial background of the media conglomerate on my computer monitor. Find out exactly who owns the parent company of the luxury magazine that published Sylvia's ridiculous defamatory article. My wealth manager typed rapidly for a few seconds, the clicking echoing over the phone line. It is a regional media group, he replied. They own that specific luxury magazine, along with a few local radio stations and high-traffic lifestyle blogs. They are currently valued at roughly $7 million, but their profit margins have been steadily declining for the past 2 quarters due to poor management. Perfect, I said, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips. I do not want to sue them for defamation. I want you to dip into the blind trust and acquire the entire parent company. Buy a controlling majority of their corporate shares before the stock market closes today. Offer them an all-cash premium they cannot possibly refuse. There was a stunned, heavy silence on the other end of the encrypted phone line. You want to buy the entire media company? My wealth manager asked, his voice laced with a mixture of shock and profound professional admiration. Yes, I confirmed, closing the browser window on my computer. Sylvia thinks she can use the press to publicly bully me into submission. She is about to learn exactly what happens when I become the press. Execute the acquisition immediately. Saturday night arrived with a crisp chill in the air. I sat in the back of a sleek black town car, meticulously reviewing the forged investor prospectus I had pulled from Sylvia's abandoned designer purse the night before. Trey was incredibly desperate. He was asking for $20 million in emergency capital from private equity angels, promising a massive return on investment within 6 months. He had completely omitted the $15 million federal environmental tax liability he had triggered when his bulldozers broke the soil. He had utterly fabricated a narrative about the severed water rights, claiming the resort had full access to the valley aquifer. It was a masterclass in aggressive corporate fraud, and I was about to burn it to the absolute ground. The town car pulled up to the heavily guarded entrance of the eco-resort. Trey had spent an absolute fortune trying to hide his massive failures from the wealthy investors. Dozens of high-intensity theatrical lights were angled perfectly to illuminate the completed concrete structures, while keeping the dead brown grass and the massive bone-dry swimming pools hidden in deep shadows. Temporary facades had been erected to make the main lobby look finished. Expensive sports cars and luxury sedans lined the temporary gravel driveway. The state's wealthiest investors were inside, completely unaware that they were standing on a financially toxic wasteland that had zero access to running water. I stepped out of the car, letting the cool breeze catch the fabric of my dress. I was not wearing my heavy denim work overalls or my steel-toed boots tonight. I was wearing a floor-length, custom-tailored emerald green evening gown that caught the ambient light with every single step I took. My hair was styled perfectly, and I wore a simple but incredibly expensive diamond necklace. I looked exactly like the powerful billionaire I secretly was. Flanking me on either side were two highly intimidating corporate auditors from my private wealth management firm. They wore crisp charcoal suits and carried heavy leather briefcases containing every single fraudulent invoice, embezzled receipt, and defaulted loan document Trey had generated over the past month. We walked purposefully up the wide concrete steps toward the main ballroom entrance. I could hear the faint sound of a live string quartet playing inside, desperately masking the utter panic of the event. Standing right at the grand double doors, playing the role of the gracious high society hostess, was my stepmother, Sylvia. She was wearing a tight silver dress, clutching a glass of champagne, and flashing a fake practice smile at late-arriving guests as she directed them toward the open bar. The exact moment Sylvia's eyes locked onto me, her fake smile instantly vanished. The color completely drained from her heavily contoured face. She remembered running from my greenhouse in the dead of night like a common thief. She remembered leaving her purse behind. But more than anything, she saw the sheer, unadulterated power radiating from my posture. Sylvia rushed forward, practically throwing her body in front of the heavy wooden doors to physically block my path. Her champagne glass shook violently in her hand, spilling expensive liquid onto the concrete. "What on earth do you think you are doing here?" Sylvia hissed. keeping her voice low and frantic so the wealthy investors mingling just inside would not hear her panic. "You are not on the guest list, Gwendolyn. This is an exclusive investor gala for real business professionals. You cannot just show up here and try to ruin your sister's big night because you are bitter and jealous. Go back to your dirty little plants before I have you arrested for trespassing." Through the narrow crack in the heavy wooden doors, I could clearly hear Trey's deep, arrogant voice echoing over a microphone. He was standing on a raised stage, actively lying to a room full of millionaires. He was confidently assuring them that the completely empty swimming pools were just waiting on a minor, insignificant clerical approval from the city water department that would be resolved by Monday morning. He was painting a picture of sustainable luxury, begging for their millions while standing on a stage built with stolen, embezzled money. "I am not here to ruin anything, Sylvia," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. "I am simply here to provide these fine investors with full financial transparency before they sign away their hard-earned wealth to a con artist." Sylvia's eyes darted frantically to the two stern-looking auditors standing right behind me. Panic fully seized her. She snapped her fingers, summoning a massive, broad-chested private security guard who had been stationed near the coat check. "Remove this woman immediately," Sylvia commanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "She is a disgruntled family member trying to cause a scene. Throw her off the property right now. Use physical force if you have to." The large security guard stepped forward, squaring his massive shoulders to intimidate me into leaving. "Ma'am, you are going to have to leave the premises right now," he said in a gruff, severe warning tone. I did not take a single step backward. I did not raise my voice or show even a fraction of an ounce of fear. I calmly opened my small evening clutch and pulled out a thick, legally binding document stamped with the official red wax seal of the State Financial Registry. I ignored Sylvia entirely and handed the crisp paperwork directly to the head of security. "I highly recommend you read the name listed under the primary creditor before you make a terrible career mistake," I told the guard, my voice cutting through the cool night air like a razor blade. The large man frowned, looking down at the official bank document. His eyes widened significantly as he read the bold print detailing the legal ownership of the property. "I hold the primary $30 million mortgage on this entire property," I stated clearly, making absolutely sure Sylvia heard every single syllable. "I legally own the ground you are standing on. Step aside." The guard slowly lowered the paper, looked at a completely horrified, speechless Sylvia, and immediately stepped out of my way. I pushed past my wicked stepmother, pulling the heavy wooden doors wide open, and walked straight into the brilliantly lit ballroom to face my brother-in-law. I stepped past the heavy wooden doors and let them swing shut behind me, sealing my stepmother outside in the cold night air. The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom was a masterclass in high-stakes deception and profound corporate desperation. Trey had spared absolutely no expense to create an illusion of undeniable success. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the unfinished exposed steel beams of the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light deliberately designed to distract from the bare concrete walls. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated smoothly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive champagne and artisan hors d'oeuvres. At the far end of the vast room, an enormous digital screen displayed a pristine, highly detailed computer-generated rendering of the eco-resort. The fake image showed cascading waterfalls, sparkling blue swimming pools, and lush, vibrant golf courses that simply did not exist in reality. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my custom emerald green evening gown brushing softly against the rented carpet. My two corporate auditors walked silently a half step behind me, their presence commanding and severe. They gripped their heavy leather briefcases tightly, securing the undeniable proof of Trey's impending destruction. The crowd of wealthy private equity angels, venture capitalists, and elite real estate investors began to part, sensing the sudden drastic shift in the room's energy. These were ruthless men and women who smelled money and power for a living, and they could instantly tell that the dynamic of the evening had just fundamentally changed. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead on the raised stage at the front of the room. Trey was standing confidently behind a clear acrylic podium, wearing a dark velvet suit that practically screamed unearned arrogance. He held a wireless microphone projecting his deep, smooth voice to the room of attentive millionaires. He was in the middle of delivering the most critical pitch of his entire life, completely unaware that the executioner had just entered the building. "We are standing on the precipice of a hospitality revolution," Trey declared smoothly, gesturing broadly to the glowing digital screen behind him. "With just a $20 million injection of emergency capital tonight, you will secure a ground floor equity stake in the most lucrative sustainable wellness destination in the entire state. The minor zoning delays regarding our municipal water lines have already been fully cleared by my exceptional legal team. We open our doors to the ultra-wealthy in exactly 4 months, and your return on investment will be unprecedented." He turned his body to face the center aisle to emphasize his point, and that was when he finally saw me. I was standing directly in the front row, less than 10 feet away from the edge of the stage. For one fraction of a second, his charismatic facade completely shattered. His eyes widened in sheer horror, and the hand holding the microphone trembled visibly. He knew I had blacklisted his supply chain. He knew I owned the water rights. But he had absolutely no idea how I had bypassed his heavy security detail, or why I was standing there looking like a billionaire corporate raider instead of a muddy botanist. But Trey was a seasoned con artist, and his survival instincts kicked in immediately. He quickly recovered his posture, flashing a brilliantly fake, highly condescending smile down at me. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we have a highly unexpected guest this evening," Trey announced, his voice dripping with mock amusement and forced charm. "Please excuse the brief interruption. This is my wife's older sister, Gwendolyn. She has always been a little confused about how the complex world of commercial real estate works. She's a botanist, you see. She prefers playing in the dirt over understanding high-level financial markets." A ripple of nervous, polite laughter spread through the front rows of wealthy investors. Trey used that brief moment of distraction to make a sharp, aggressive hand signal to the 2 large security guards stationed at the far corners of the stage. He was desperately trying to have me physically dragged out into the parking lot before I could open my mouth and ruin his fraudulent pitch. I did not retreat. I did not raise my voice or act like a hysterical, disgruntled relative causing family drama. I stood my ground perfectly still and looked directly at the 2 massive security guards who were rapidly approaching me from the flanks. The lead auditor, standing to my left, calmly unclasped his briefcase, pulled out the officially stamped mortgage documentation bearing the red wax seal of the state registry, and held it up for the guards to read. "You are currently standing on a commercial property that is in active irreversible default," I told the guards, my voice projecting clearly and carrying absolute authority without the need for a microphone. "As the primary legal holder of the $30 million commercial mortgage on this resort, I am technically your employer tonight. If you lay a single finger on me, I will ensure you are sued for assault and permanently stripped of your private security licenses. Stand down immediately." The 2 large men stopped dead in their tracks. They looked at the official bank seals on the heavy document, then looked up at Trey, who was now sweating profusely under the bright stage lights. Realizing that Trey was not actually the man signing their paychecks anymore, the guards immediately stepped back and crossed their arms behind their backs, completely refusing to intervene on his behalf. I walked up the 3 carpeted steps and stepped onto the stage. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The music had stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely. The only sound in the massive room was the sharp clicking of my heels as I approached the acrylic podium. Trey stepped directly into my path, his chest puffed out in a pathetic, desperate attempt at physical intimidation. He covered the microphone with his large hand, his eyes burning with absolute panic and unhinged fury. "Get off my stage right now!" Trey hissed, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "I am in the middle of securing $20 million. If you ruin this pitch, I swear to God I will completely destroy you." "You cannot destroy a bank, Trey," I whispered back, a slow, predatory smile crossing my face as I looked up into his terrified eyes. I sidestepped him effortlessly. He could not risk grabbing my arm or causing a physical altercation in front of $20 million worth of potential capital. He was completely paralyzed by his own desperate need to maintain his wealthy professional facade in front of the investors. I walked right up to the podium and placed my sleek tablet down on the acrylic surface next to his useless presentation notes. I reached over and deliberately unplugged the main video cable from his laptop, instantly cutting the feed to the fake computer-generated rendering of his resort. The massive screen behind us went pitch black. A collective gasp echoed through the crowded ballroom as the illusion was literally unplugged. I firmly plugged the cable directly into my own device. I turned to face the sea of wealthy, expectant investors, projecting my voice with absolute unwavering authority. Do not invest a single dime, gentlemen. This man does not own the water rights, he does not own his supply chain, and he certainly does not own his own debt. Let me show you his real financials. I tapped the screen of my tablet. The massive digital display behind us instantly transformed. Gone were the beautiful fabricated images of cascading waterfalls and lush green golf courses. In their place, a stark, glaring white spreadsheet filled the 20-foot screen. It was the complete, unredacted forensic audit of Trey's $30 million commercial bridge loan. A loan that I legally owned. Gentlemen, I said, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. What you are looking at is a masterclass in federal wire fraud. The man standing next to me did not bring you here tonight to fund a minor municipal water delay. He brought you here to bail him out of a massive embezzlement scheme. I swiped my tablet to zoom in on a specific series of highlighted transactions. The high-definition screen enlarged the numbers so that even the investors in the very back row could read them clearly. 3 weeks ago, Trey submitted a withdrawal request to his lender for $150,000, I announced, maintaining absolute eye contact with the lead investors. He explicitly coded this request as payment for heavy excavation machinery rentals. But if you look at the routing numbers, you will see that the money did not go to a construction vendor. It was wired directly to an ultra-luxury plastic surgery clinic in Miami. The patient listed on the secure medical transfer was my stepmother, Sylvia. A loud, choked gasp echoed from the front row. My father, Donovan, stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. He looked from the massive screen down to Sylvia, who was currently trembling near the entrance, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror. My father finally realized the truth. He had put his entire life savings, his home, and his retirement up as collateral for this loan. He thought he was investing in a profitable commercial real estate venture. Instead, he had bankrupted himself to pay for Sylvia's latest cosmetic enhancements and Trey's lavish lifestyle. I swiped the screen again, bringing up another heavily highlighted invoice. And here is a draw request for $80,000, allegedly for imported Italian marble for the resort lobby. The actual destination was an exclusive boutique in Beverly Hills, where the funds were used to purchase 4 limited-edition designer handbags and a diamond-encrusted baby stroller for my sister. The silence in the ballroom shattered instantly. The elite private equity angels and venture capitalists erupted into furious shouting. These were ruthless financial predators who did not take kindly to being treated like gullible fools. They realized instantly that Trey was trying to use their $20 million emergency injection to cover his tracks and flee before the federal authorities caught up with him. The atmosphere in the room shifted from polite sophistication to sheer, unadulterated outrage. Trey gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, his knuckles turning pure white. Sweat poured down his forehead, ruining his expensive velvet suit. "This is a complete fabrication," he shouted into the microphone, his deep voice cracking with pure desperation. "She is a disgruntled family member. She hacked the presentation. These documents are entirely fake. Do not listen to a word she is saying." "They are certified bank records," I corrected him smoothly. I picked up the heavy stack of physical paperwork my auditor had handed me and tossed it directly onto Trey's podium. The heavy stack landed with a loud thud right in front of him. And since I am the primary lender who personally approved every single one of those fraudulent wire transfers, I can assure you they are highly accurate. Down on the floor, the family dynamic violently imploded. Donovan grabbed Sylvia by the arm, completely ignoring the crowd of angry millionaires surrounding them. You stole my retirement, my father roared, his voice shaking with a mix of absolute rage and profound devastation. You took everything I worked for and spent it on yourself. You ruined me. Sylvia shoved him away, crying hysterically as she tried to backpedal toward the exit. But the crowd of furious investors formed a solid wall around them, demanding answers and blocking any avenue of escape. The facade of their perfect high society life was completely obliterated in front of the city's most powerful people. A tall, silver-haired man in a pristine, tailored suit pushed his way to the very front of the stage. He was the lead investor Trey had been courting all evening, the man who was supposed to write the largest check to save the failing resort. He pulled a sleek smartphone from his jacket pocket and glared up at Trey with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. I sit on the advisory board for the Securities and Exchange Commission, the investor stated, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. I am making a direct phone call to the Federal Enforcement Division right this second. Nobody leaves this room until the authorities arrive. Total blinding panic finally seized Trey. The arrogant, smooth-talking real estate developer vanished, replaced by a terrified criminal, realizing he was about to spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary. He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a loud, piercing screech of static that made the crowd wince. Trey spun around, completely abandoning his wife, his father-in-law, and his fraudulent empire. He sprinted toward the heavy black curtains at the back of the stage, desperately making a run for the employee loading dock exit. He did not make it far. The two massive, highly intimidating corporate auditors who had accompanied me into the ballroom stepped out from behind the curtain, completely blocking the narrow exit path. They stood shoulder to shoulder like an impenetrable wall of solid gray wool. Trey slammed onto the brakes, nearly slipping on the polished stage floor as he realized he was totally trapped. He looked wildly around the stage, searching for another way out, but there was nowhere left to run. The financial guillotine had finally dropped. Trey skidded to a halt. The two massive corporate auditors did not flinch. He turned back around to face the stage, breathing heavily, completely cornered like a rat in a trap. The lead investor, still standing at the very front of the stage, with his expensive smartphone tightly in his hand, looked up at Trey with a gaze full of absolute disgust. He raised his commanding voice so the entire room of wealthy financiers could hear him perfectly over the ambient noise. The $20 million capital injection is officially canceled. The lead investor declared, his tone as cold and hard as solid ice. I am advising every single person in this room to walk away right now. Do not sign a single legal document. Do not transfer a single cent of capital to this man or his fraudulent development firm. A tidal wave of angry, urgent murmurs washed over the grand ballroom. Elite investors began grabbing their coats and heading straight for the main heavy wooden doors. The few who had previously shown genuine interest in Trey's eco-resort project were now actively dialing their own legal teams to ensure their initial escrow deposits were fully protected. Trey watched in sheer, unadulterated horror as his absolute last financial lifeline simply evaporated into thin air. He desperately needed that $20 million to cover the massive balloon payments and satisfy the strict emergency covenants of his $30 million commercial bridge loan. Without that investor capital coming in tonight, his entire financial structure collapsed instantly. He was in immediate catastrophic default. I walked slowly across the wide stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood floor. My lead attorney, who had been standing quietly off to the side monitoring the situation, stepped forward to join me. He held a thick, legally binding document, enclosed in a heavy blue corporate folder. Trey stumbled backward until his broad shoulders hit the clear acrylic podium. He was shaking violently, his expensive velvet suit soaked with cold sweat. "You cannot do this to me," Trey stammered, his deep voice weak and highly pathetic. "I just need a few more days to restructure the debt. I can secure private funding from out of state. I can fix this." "You are completely out of time, Trey," I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy. "You violated the core terms of the commercial mortgage the exact moment you embezzled those funds across state lines to buy designer purses. You defaulted on the strict loan covenants, your massive interest payments are due, and your primary collateral accounts are completely empty." My attorney stepped right up to the podium and thrust the heavy blue folder directly into Trey's trembling hands. "You are officially served," my attorney stated loudly and clearly. "This is a formal court-mandated notice of immediate foreclosure. As the primary lien holder, my client is seizing full legal control of this entire commercial property, effective right this exact second. Furthermore, because your personal assets were heavily used as collateral to secure the initial debt, the bank will be taking immediate physical possession of your primary residential mansion by tomorrow morning." The harsh reality of those words hit the room like a massive physical shockwave. Down on the ballroom floor, Sylvia completely lost her mind. The perfectly manicured, highly arrogant, high society facade she had spent decades meticulously building shattered into a million jagged pieces. She pushed her way aggressively past the remaining stragglers and practically threw her body against the edge of the wooden stage. "You are an absolute monster!" Sylvia screamed up at me, her voice shrill, raspy, and entirely unhinged. Her expensive, heavy makeup was badly smudged from her sudden tears, and her face was contorted with pure, ugly rage. "How could you do this to your own family? We are going to be completely homeless. You planned this vicious trap from the very beginning just to destroy my perfect life because you are a jealous, bitter weed digger." I looked down at her, entirely unbothered by her hysterical, flailing screaming. "I did not force you to steal commercial construction funds to pay for your facial reconstruction surgeries, Sylvia. I did not force you to lie to the press. You destroyed your own life with your unbelievable bottomless greed." Suddenly, Donovan pushed his way roughly through the crowd to stand right next to his wife. My father had been unusually quiet since the forensic audit was first displayed on the giant screen, completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization that his entire life savings had been vaporized to fund Sylvia's extreme vanity. But looking at Sylvia screaming at me and acting like the victim, Donovan finally snapped. The long years of being a passive, spineless husband vanished, replaced by a sudden explosive fury that radiated from his entire body. "Shut your mouth, Sylvia!" My father roared, his voice booming so loudly it startled everyone left in the ballroom. Sylvia whipped her head around to look at him, absolutely stunned by his sudden aggression. "Donovan, how dare you speak to me like that in public? Do something right now. Stop her from taking our house." "Stop her!" my father yelled, his face turning a dangerous, unhealthy shade of crimson. "She is not the one who drained my secure retirement accounts to buy limited edition handbags and diamond baby strollers. You ruined me. I remortgaged the house I built to fund this resort, and you two stole every single penny of it behind my back. You played me for a total fool." "I am your wife!" Sylvia shrieked back at him, waving her hands frantically in the air. "I deserve a certain standard of living. You promised to take care of me and provide a life of luxury. I promised to invest in a legitimate business." My father countered, stepping closer to her, completely ignoring the fact that they were having a vicious, highly public domestic dispute in front of elite corporate investors and my legal team. "You took my money and handed it directly to this incompetent fraud you call a son-in-law. I have absolutely nothing left. I am 58 years old and I am entirely bankrupt because of your disgusting vanity." The wealthy investors who were still walking toward the exits actually paused by the grand doors just to watch the spectacular, humiliating implosion of the Pierce family. Trey was leaning heavily against the podium on stage, clutching his chest and looking like he was about to physically be sick. Sylvia was sobbing loudly, trying to hit my father in the chest while he aggressively pushed her hands away. They were violently turning on each other, tearing their fake wealthy marriage apart right in front of the cameras that the event photographers had left running. I stood on the stage looking down at the absolute wreckage of their deeply flawed lives. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I only felt a profound, deeply satisfying sense of justice. My father finally stopped yelling at his wife. He looked up at me, his chest heaving heavily. His eyes were filled with a desperate, pathetic mixture of deep regret and open pleading. He looked like he was about to ask me for a massive favor. He looked like he desperately wanted me to save him from the catastrophic mess he had willingly created. I did not give him the chance to beg. I walked to the very edge of the wooden stage, looking down directly into my father's wide, panicked eyes. You handed my grandfather's legacy to a con artist, I told him, my voice ringing with cold, absolute finality. Now I am taking it back. All of it. When my father married a woman utterly obsessed with high society status, I made a choice that would alter the course of my entire life. I kept the $50 million fortune my late grandfather secretly left me completely hidden from them. It turned out to be the most brilliant tactical decision I could have ever made. Just days after their lavish wedding, my new stepmother would show up at my doorstep uninvited, flanked by a vicious corporate lawyer intending to steal the very ground beneath my feet. She had absolutely no idea she was marching straight into a financial death trap I had meticulously prepared. But the true beginning of her spectacular downfall started at the wedding reception. Before I reveal how I dismantled their fake empire piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever watched a toxic family member get exactly the karma they deserve. My name is Gwendolyn. I am 33 years old, and for my entire life I was treated as the ultimate disappointment of the Pierce family. While my father Donovan spent his days desperately trying to project the image of a wealthy aristocrat, I spent my days with my hands buried in soil. I am a specialized botanist. I run a botanical research facility out of a massive aging greenhouse that my late grandfather Winston built decades ago. To my father and his elite circle of friends, my profession was nothing more than glorified dirt digging. The air inside the country club ballroom was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and imported orchids. It was my father's wedding day. At 58 years old, he was marrying Sylvia, a 52-year-old social climber who viewed my father's remaining credit lines as her personal piggy bank. I sat quietly at the grand head table wearing a simple tailored dark green suit that made me look like an absolute outsider among the sea of heavily beaded gowns and flashy tuxedos. My father had spared zero expense for this one evening, desperate to convince Sylvia's wealthy social circle that he was a titan of industry. Suddenly, the polite chatter around our table violently ceased. Sylvia stood up from her chair, her heavily manicured hand clutching a thick leather billing folio from the venue management. She marched over to my seat and, with a loud theatrical sigh, deliberately meant to draw the attention of every single guest nearby, she slammed the heavy leather folio directly onto my dinner plate. The impact shattered my wine glass, sending crystal shards and expensive red wine spilling across the pristine white tablecloth. Your father has completely drained his accounts to pay for this beautiful wedding, Sylvia announced. Her voice pitched perfectly so the surrounding tables could hear every single word. Since you did not even bother to buy us a wedding gift, and you are currently living rent-free in your grandfather's useless, crumbling old greenhouse, the very least you can do is pay for the floral arrangements and the catering tonight. Take whatever money you make from selling your little weeds and be useful to this family for once in your life. I looked down at the soaked invoice resting on my plate. The total printed at the bottom was $18,000. Across the table, Sylvia's 28-year-old daughter, Kelsey, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Kelsey was the golden child of this new blended family, an arrogant lifestyle influencer who contributed absolutely nothing to society. She immediately lifted her smartphone, angling the camera to capture my humiliation for her thousands of followers. Sitting right next to Kelsey was her husband, Trey. He was a 32-year-old African-American real estate developer who had built his fortune by paving over natural landscapes to construct overpriced luxury condos. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his custom silk tie, and swirled his expensive bourbon with a highly arrogant, predatory grin. "Come on, Gwendolyn." Trey sneered, his deep voice intentionally loud enough for his wealthy business partners at the very next table to hear. If you are struggling to scrape together the cash from your little dirt digging business, my real estate firm can offer you a payday loan right now. The interest rates are completely brutal, but family helps, family right. My father just stared down at his empty plate, absolutely refusing to meet my eyes. He was far too cowardly to stand up to Sylvia, and entirely too obsessed with maintaining his image in front of Trey's affluent associates to defend his own flesh and blood. They all sat there eagerly expecting me to break down to cause a massive scene or to run away in tears of profound humiliation. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or beg for any mercy. I simply picked up the leather folio and calmly wiped a drop of spilled wine off the cover. $18,000, I said, my voice perfectly level and composed. Are you absolutely sure you do not want to add a larger gratuity for the waitstaff, Sylvia? Or did you plan to stiff them on their hard work tonight, too? Sylvia crossed her arms tightly, her face flushing with intense anger at my complete lack of submission. Just pay the bill, Gwendolyn. Stop trying to act like you are above us when you literally play in the mud for a living. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I did not pull out the standard debit card my father assumed I carried. Instead, I pulled out a heavy, unmarked, solid black Centurion card. The matte metal gleamed under the opulent chandeliers above us. I handed it directly to the waiter who was hovering nervously nearby. Put the entire reception tab on this, I told the waiter smoothly. And add a very generous tip for your team. You have had to put up with a lot of nonsense tonight. The waiter's eyes went wide as he took the heavy metal card, nodding quickly before hurrying away toward the billing counter. Back at the head table, the silence was absolute and incredibly deafening. Trey completely dropped his smirk, his posture suddenly rigid as he stared at the spot where the black card had been. Kelsey slowly lowered her phone, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. My father finally looked up, his jaw hanging slightly open as his brain tried to process what had just happened. Sylvia, recovering from her initial shock, let out a harsh and highly dismissive scoff. She looked at the guests around us and forced a loud theatrical laugh to save face. Well, I suppose we should thank you, she said, her voice dripping with pure venom. You just maxed out your entire life savings and probably took out a predatory loan just to show off for 5 minutes. Have fun paying that off for the rest of your pathetic life. Enjoy your completely empty bank account. I just smiled, taking a calm sip of my sparkling water. They were so blinded by their own extreme arrogance, so utterly convinced of my poverty, that they could not fathom the reality of the situation. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He carried the leather folio on a silver tray, placing it highly respectfully in front of me. Your card, ma'am, he said politely. And the front desk asked me to hand this to you. It was delivered via secure courier this afternoon to the venue exactly per your instructions. He placed a thick wax-sealed envelope right next to my water glass. The distinct logo of a highly exclusive private wealth management firm was embossed on the front. I picked up my black card and slid it safely back into my pocket. Then, with deliberate and agonizing slowness, I broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was my monthly statement for the blind trust my late grandfather had established. Grandfather Winston knew exactly what my father was. He knew Donovan was a reckless spender who would eventually destroy the Pierce family legacy to impress a greedy woman like Sylvia. So my grandfather bypassed him entirely, leaving his fortune and the massive land holdings exclusively to me. I pulled out the crisp watermarked paper and let my eyes fall to the bottom line. The bold black ink displayed the current liquid balance of the trust, $52,450,000. I folded the statement, slipped it securely into my blazer, and looked across the table at Sylvia's gloating face, then at Trey's calculating stare, and finally at my father's spineless posture. Thank you for the lovely dinner, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up tall. I will leave you all to celebrate. Enjoy it while it lasts. As I walked out of the opulent ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor, I felt a massive surge of absolute power. Sylvia and Trey thought they were dealing with a defenseless gardener. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who held the financial power to buy and sell their entire existence. The trap was officially set, and they were eagerly walking right into it. The morning air was sharp and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the chaotic flashing lights of the previous night. Trey was currently waking up in a federal holding cell, stripped of his custom velvet suit and his endless arrogance. Gordon, his slick corporate lawyer, was sitting right in the cell next to him, realizing his legal career was permanently over. But my work was not entirely finished. I drove my heavy-duty transport truck up the winding, perfectly manicured roads of the city's most exclusive gated community. Today I was not delivering a rare Japanese maple to a wealthy client. I was delivering a harsh dose of absolute reality. The sprawling, ostentatious mansion that my father and Sylvia called home had been leveraged to the absolute hilt to secure Trey's disastrous $30 million bridge loan. Because Trey had defaulted, and because I legally owned that debt, the bank had executed an immediate emergency foreclosure on the primary collateral. The property now legally belonged to me. I pulled into the wide, circular driveway. 3 black and white county sheriff cruisers were already parked near the massive front columns, their lights off, but their presence commanding. I stepped out of my truck wearing my sturdy steel-toed work boots and a tailored charcoal blazer. I held a crisp, heavily stamped legal folder containing the final eviction mandate. Sitting right on the edge of the pristine concrete curb, looking like an absolute ghost, was my father Donovan. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit from the disastrous gala. He looked like he had aged 20 years overnight. Beside him sat a single small leather suitcase. That was it. That was the entirety of his worldly possessions. He had handed his entire life savings, his secure retirement, and the title to this massive estate over to a con artist, all to appease a wife who only loved his wallet. I walked slowly toward the front steps, my boots crunching loudly on the driveway. Donovan slowly lifted his head. His eyes were hollow, completely devoid of the status-obsessed pride that had defined his entire existence. "Gwendolyn." My father rasped his voice barely more than a dry whisper. "I have absolutely nothing left. My accounts are frozen. The bank took the cars. I do not even have enough cash to buy a cup of coffee. Please, you have to let me stay in the guest house, just until I can figure this out." I stopped and looked down at the man who had allowed his new wife to humiliate me, who had thrown away my grandfather's legacy for a fleeting taste of high society prestige. "You chose to back a fraud, Donovan," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any pity. "You stood by and watched them try to steal the very dirt out from under my feet. The guest house belongs to the bank now, and the bank is not running a charity." I walked past him, ascending the wide marble steps. A tall, broad-shouldered county sheriff met me at the massive double doors. "Good morning, ma'am," the sheriff said politely, touching the brim of his hat. "We have secured the ground floor, but the female resident is actively refusing to vacate the premises. She has barricaded herself inside the master suite on the second floor and is refusing to comply with our lawful orders to exit the property." I nodded, tightening my grip on the legal folder. "I will come up with you." I followed the sheriff and 2 deputies through the extravagant foyer. The mansion was a sickening monument to Sylvia's bottomless greed. Massive crystal chandeliers, tacky gold-plated mirrors, and imported silk rugs lined the hallways. Every single item in this house had been paid for by my grandfather's squandered wealth and, more recently, by the stolen commercial loan funds they had illegally embezzled. We climbed the sweeping grand staircase and walked down the plush carpeted hallway to the master suite. The heavy mahogany doors were tightly shut. I could hear frantic, chaotic crashing sounds coming from the other side like an animal tearing through a cage. "Ma'am, open this door immediately," the sheriff commanded, pounding his heavy fist against the wood. "You are in direct violation of a federal eviction notice. If you do not open this door, we will be forced to breach it." "Go away!" Sylvia's shrill, panicked voice shrieked from inside the bedroom. "This is my house. You have absolutely no right to be here. I am calling the police." "We are the police, ma'am." The deputy sighed heavily. "Stand back." The sheriff nodded to his deputy. With one powerful, coordinated kick, the heavy mahogany doors splintered at the lock and swung violently open, crashing loudly against the interior walls. I stepped into the massive master suite right behind the officers. The room looked like a luxury boutique that had just been hit by a massive tornado. Designer clothes were thrown everywhere. Expensive high heels were scattered across the floor. Sylvia was kneeling frantically on the floor in front of a massive walk-in closet. She was wearing silk pajamas, her heavy makeup deeply smeared down her cheeks, making her look entirely unhinged. She was violently shoving velvet jewelry boxes, diamond necklaces, and limited edition designer watches into a large canvas duffel bag. Step away from the bags, ma'am, the sheriff ordered, resting his hand firmly on his utility belt. Everything in this house is now property of the primary lien holder. You are legally forbidden from removing any items of value from the premises. Sylvia whipped her head around, clutching a thick string of pearls tightly to her chest. Her wild, bloodshot eyes darted past the deputies and locked directly onto me. The sheer blinding hatred in her expression was quickly overtaken by absolute crushing terror. You! Sylvia gasped, scrambling backward until her back hit the closet door. You are a complete monster. You planned this vicious trap. You took my husband's money, you threw my son-in-law in a federal prison, and now you are stealing my home. You are trying to leave me on the streets. I walked slowly into the center of the room, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I did not steal anything, Sylvia, I corrected her smoothly. You bought those diamonds and those designer watches using embezzled construction funds from a commercial loan. You committed federal wire fraud to fund your vanity. I am simply repossessing stolen property. The deputies stepped forward physically, separating Sylvia from the duffel bag full of jewelry. She tried to fight them, thrashing her arms and screaming hysterically, but they easily overpowered her, pulling her firmly to her feet. Please, Sylvia suddenly shrieked, the arrogant high society matriarch completely vanishing, leaving only a pathetic, desperate woman completely terrified of the consequences she had earned. She stopped fighting the deputies and dropped hard to her knees right in front of me, her silk pajamas pooling on the floor. She looked up at me, tears carving thick black lines of mascara down her cheeks. "Gwendolyn, please," Sylvia sobbed, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "I have absolutely no money. My bank accounts are completely frozen. Trey is in jail, and Kelsey will not even answer my phone calls. I do not have a car. I do not have a place to sleep tonight. Just give me a small loan. Just a few $1,000s to get a hotel room and buy some food. I am begging you. We are family. You cannot just leave me with absolutely nothing." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had happily thrown a $22,000 catering bill in my face just a few weeks ago. The woman who had proudly called me a dirt digger and actively plotted to steal the very water from beneath my grandfather's land. I reached a single hand into the front pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. I felt around for a moment, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of a coin. I pulled it out and held it between my thumb and index finger. I looked down directly into Sylvia's pleading, desperate eyes. I opened my fingers. The single silver quarter fell through the air. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, resonant clink, bouncing once before rolling to a dead stop right against Sylvia's trembling kneecap. Call someone who cares. Exactly 1 month had passed since that single silver quarter hit the hardwood floor of the foreclosed mansion. The legal and financial systems moved with astonishing ruthless speed when fueled by ironclad evidence of federal wire fraud and backed by $50 million of clean corporate capital. Trey was currently sitting in a highly secure federal holding facility, completely stripped of his custom velvet suits and his endless arrogance, awaiting his official sentencing hearing. Sylvia had vanished from the city entirely, utterly disgraced and completely broke after the authorities seized every single piece of jewelry she had purchased with stolen loan funds. My father, Donovan, had moved into a cheap, rundown motel on the outskirts of the county, entirely cut off from the high society circles he used to worship. The massive $30 million commercial debt was officially dissolved through the foreclosure process, and the county courts formally transferred the absolute, unencumbered deed to the 50-acre valley directly into my name. I stood on the exact same patch of gravel where Trey had mockingly told me to pack up my weeds and leave just a few short weeks prior. The early morning air was crisp and clear. But today, the heavy machinery idling loudly on the property line did not belong to a corrupt real estate developer. They belonged entirely to me. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, decisive signal to my site foreman. A massive fleet of heavy excavators roared to life. I stood with my arms firmly crossed, a deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face as the heavy steel buckets smashed violently into the thick concrete foundations of Trey's unfinished luxury swimming pools. The hideous artificial structures he had tried to force onto my grandfather's pristine land were brutally crushed into fine gray dust. The imported high-maintenance golf course turf was aggressively ripped up from the soil and hauled away in a line of massive dump trucks. I was completely erasing every single physical trace of his arrogant, fraudulent vision from the face of the earth. The deafening sound of cracking concrete and tearing metal was the absolute sweetest symphony I had ever heard. I did not just want my grandfather's land back. I wanted to elevate his lifelong legacy into something absolutely magnificent that would stand for generations. I unlocked the full financial power of my $50 million blind trust. Within days, I mobilized the massive agricultural supply chain network I had acquired during the height of our conflict. Dozens of commercial freight trucks rolled continuously down the valley road. They were not carrying cheap luxury hotel fixtures or tacky marble slabs. They were delivering highly advanced state-of-the-art climate control systems, massive reinforced glass panels, and thousands of tons of premium nutrient-rich organic soil. I hired the absolute best commercial architects and ecological engineers in the entire country. We immediately began transforming the 50-acre plot into the largest, most technologically advanced botanical research and conservation facility in the state. We were actively building massive towering biome domes to house critically endangered plant species, extensive subterranean seed banks for vital agricultural preservation, and sprawling public gardens dedicated entirely to environmental education. I was no longer just the quiet botanist digging in the dirt while my family mocked me. I was the chief executive officer of a massive green empire, and I was calling every single shot. Managing a commercial construction site of that monumental scale required a truly massive workforce. I had over 200 union workers, structural engineers, and heavy landscapers on site every single day. To keep project morale high and show my genuine appreciation for their intense physical labor, I made it a daily habit to cater premium breakfast and high-end coffee for the entire crew. On a brisk Tuesday morning, I was standing near the main entrance security gates reviewing a highly complex set of architectural blueprints with my lead structural engineer. A white delivery van from a local popular coffee franchise pulled up to the security checkpoint. The driver put the vehicle in park and hurried around to open the sliding side door to unload the massive catering order. A young woman stepped out of the passenger side of the van, struggling to balance her weight. She was wearing a highly unflattering dark brown canvas uniform apron over a cheap, faded black shirt. Her hair, which used to be professionally styled every single morning for her glamorous social media posts, was now pulled back into a messy, frantic ponytail. She awkwardly balanced two massive, heavy cardboard trays, carrying 12 large iced coffees. It was Kelsey, the former luxury lifestyle influencer who used to brag to her hundreds of thousands of followers about her private jets and her diamond-encrusted baby strollers, was now working the early morning delivery shift as a minimum-wage barista. Her husband was facing a decade in federal prison. Her mother was homeless. Her bank accounts had been completely frozen by the federal government during the embezzlement investigation. Because all her designer bags and luxury cars had been seized as evidence of wire fraud, she had absolutely nothing left to sell. She had no marketable skills, no college degree she had actually earned, and no wealthy stepfather to fund her extravagant vanity. She had been forced to take the absolute only job that would hire her. Kelsey turned around with the heavy trays of coffee and completely froze in her tracks. She saw me standing there in my tailored charcoal blazer and my sturdy steel-toed work boots, surrounded by a massive team of professionals who answered directly to my commands. Our eyes locked across the active construction site. I did not sneer at her. I did not pull out my smartphone to record her profound humiliation for the internet. I did not need to mock her the way she had mocked me for years. I simply maintained a cold, perfectly level, and utterly indifferent gaze. The sheer burning shame completely washed over Kelsey's face. Her cheeks turned a dark, blotchy red. She quickly lowered her head deliberately, hiding her face behind the tall plastic coffee cups, and scurried past me toward the workers' break area as fast as her feet could possibly carry her. She looked absolutely destroyed by the reality of her new life. I did not say a single word to her. I just turned my attention back to my blueprints and continued building my empire. The crisp spring morning air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and fresh cedar across the valley. Exactly 18 months after I drove my transport truck off that dusty construction site, the 50 acres of land had been completely reborn. The chaotic noise of Trey's heavy diesel excavators was entirely gone, replaced by the peaceful sound of rushing water from our newly established subterranean aquifer taps. I stood at the edge of the grand entrance looking out over the crowning achievement of my entire life. The Winston Pierce Botanical Reserve was officially open to the public. Where a massive dry concrete swimming pool had once been poured for a fraudulent luxury resort, a breathtaking 60-foot-tall geodesic glass dome now stood. It housed the most extensive collection of endangered tropical flora in the country. The dead imported golf course turf had been completely ripped out and replaced with sprawling, vibrant meadows of native wildflowers and vital conservation seed banks. I had not just reclaimed my grandfather's legacy, I had multiplied it 100 times over. Hundreds of guests were taking their seats on the pristine main lawn. Leading environmental scientists, local community leaders, and legitimate high-level philanthropists were all gathered under the bright morning sun. They were here to celebrate a massive victory for conservation, completely unaware of the absolute bloodbath it had taken to secure this very ground. As I waited backstage for my introduction, my private wealth manager stepped up beside me, handing me a glass of sparkling water. He offered a warm, highly respectful smile. We had done it. We had successfully executed the most aggressive, flawless financial takeover in the state's history. And the people who had forced my hand were currently paying the ultimate price for their bottomless greed. Trey was no longer wearing custom velvet suits or drinking expensive bourbon in elite country clubs. He was currently sitting in a highly secure federal penitentiary wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The mountain of irrefutable forensic evidence we handed over to the authorities left his defense attorneys completely paralyzed. He had been swiftly convicted of massive interstate wire fraud and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. His entire real estate development firm was liquidated by the state to pay back the furious investors he had blatantly lied to. Sylvia, true to her entirely parasitic nature, did not stick around to support her new son-in-law through his darkest hour, nor did she stand by her husband. The exact second the bank formally seized their sprawling mansion and completely froze their assets, Sylvia packed whatever cheap clothes she had left and immediately filed for divorce. She fled the state in absolute profound disgrace, permanently exiled from the high society circles she had spent her entire life trying to infiltrate. She was last rumored to be living in a tiny cramped apartment somewhere in Nevada, desperately trying to find another wealthy Mark who would not run a background check. Kelsey, stripped of her fake influencer status and her fraudulent wealth, was now working grueling double shifts as a minimum wage barista just to pay her basic utility bills. She had completely deleted her social media accounts, utterly erased from the internet she once ruled with such cruel arrogance. And then there was my father. Donovan Pierce had gambled his entire life savings, his secure retirement, and his only loyal daughter to appease a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a walking credit card. Today, Donovan was living in a cheap, rundown roadside motel on the absolute fringes of the county. He had tried to call me a dozen times over the past year, leaving pathetic weeping voicemails begging for a second chance, begging for a small loan, begging for anything. I changed my phone number and blocked him permanently. Family is built on mutual respect and fierce protection, not on convenience and financial extortion. He had made his bed with con artists, and now he had to sleep in it alone. A sudden round of roaring applause brought me back to the present moment. The master of ceremonies was calling my name over the public address system. I handed my water glass to my wealth manager and walked confidently up the steps to the main stage. I was wearing a stunning tailored forest green suit, my posture perfectly straight, my head held incredibly high. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, the exact same style of podium Trey had stood behind when he tried to lie to $20 million worth of investors. But unlike Trey, I had absolutely nothing to hide. I looked out over the massive crowd. I saw the towering glass biomes gleaming in the sunlight. I saw a thriving green empire that I had built with my own two hands, my own intellect, and my own absolute refusal to be a victim. Thank you all for being here today. I began, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully across the beautiful reserve. This land has always been a sanctuary for growth. But for a very brief dark period, certain individuals tried to pave over this sanctuary. They tried to replace vital living history with an artificial monument to their own extreme vanity. The crowd listened in captivated silence. They looked at me and saw nothing more than a quiet woman with soil under her fingernails. They thought they could bully me, steal from me, and cast me aside because they valued loud arrogance over quiet, steady observation. I gripped the edges of the podium, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. They thought they could bury me in the dirt because I was a botanist. They just did not understand the dirt is where I grow best. The entire audience erupted into a deafening standing ovation. The applause echoed across the valley, ringing through the glass domes and soaring up toward the clear blue sky. I stood at the podium, respected, powerful, and utterly independent. I had protected my grandfather's legacy, destroyed the people who tried to ruin me, and secured my own future on my own uncompromising terms. Have you ever let your success be your ultimate revenge? Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share your story below.